we'll call it. Okay, it is 2:30. I will call the regular meeting of the Salina City Commission meeting to order. First, I would ask staff if confirmation of the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
Yes.
Thank you. With that, we will have roll call.
Mayor Hoppick.
Here.
Commissioner Davis.
Commissioner Davis here.
Commissioner France.
Here.
Commissioner Hodges.
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
Would those that are able please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, before we move on, I will ask Mr. Scragg to go ahead and explain how we're set up again today for the call-ins and those that are listening outside of the room.
Thank you, Mayor Hoppick. As you know by now, we are still under a mass gathering limitation of 15, and so not entirely knowing how many people might show up for public comment or for an agenda item, we're continuing to format our meetings to allow for public participation by using what they're calling a conference bridge. So we're using software on a laptop that allows me to monitor the calls, and people are able to call into a conference call phone line that I believe can take up to 150 callers. And so that number is published on our agendas, and the instructions are published on our agendas. But the number to call is 785-621-0800, and the participant ID number is 782956. And callers will be prompted to announce themselves, and then following that to press the pound sign. They don't necessarily have to announce themselves, but they at least need to press the pound sign to enter the conference call. And so if they're participating in the conference call, they'd also have the opportunity to view the meeting using different technology. So we've got a staff person on the line that I'm going to confirm that our technology is working. Scott, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so the conference call is working. Scott, can you confirm that Salina Media Connections cable feed is working?
Yes, it is.
And can you confirm that Salina Media Connections online feed is working?
Yes, it is.
And then lastly, can you confirm that the City of Salina's YouTube live feed is working?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so all of our technology is up and running. I'm going to put you on mute, Scott. And as one more reminder, we do have executive sessions scheduled on today's agenda, quite a few of them actually. We've been stacking them up as we've been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. But as we go into executive session, we now have a setup in the side room that I think you've had an opportunity to look at. If you're comfortable with that seating arrangement and that spacing, we can adjourn in executive session to that room rather than stay here. But nonetheless, you'll need to make a motion for executive session, specify amount of time to be in executive session. We'll then adjourn to executive session. The conference call will stay live. It'll be muted so the callers can stay on the line, and then the Salina Media Connection feeds will go to their normal message about being in executive session. The YouTube live feed will do the same. When we come out of executive session, we'll return to this room. We'll fire everything back up, the conference call, the Salina Media Connection feeds, and the YouTube live feed. And if there's need for additional extensions, we'll come out here, we'll fire everything up, we'll make a necessary motion for additional executive session, and then adjourn back into the side room. While I'm on that topic, the first executive session on the agenda is related to trade secrets. The next four are all legal, 4 different topics, but they all relate to legal. And so City Legal Counsel has advised that we can make motions by topic. So you could make one motion for the trade secrets, and then you could make one combined motion for the other 4 legal executive sessions, which would avoid the need to have to come out here 4 additional times for additional motions. And we can walk you through that when we get to that part of the agenda. So I'll repeat one more time. For those that wish to call in, the call-in number is 785-621-0800. They'll be prompted for a participant ID number, and that is 782-956. They'll then be prompted to announce themselves, which is optional, but they will have to complete that by pressing the pound sign. At that point, they'll be on the conference call. They'll come in muted, and then when there's citizens forum or public comment and the appropriate portions of the agenda, we'll call for public comment. They'll be asked to press star 9. That then will create an icon on the laptop that I'm monitoring that indicates they wish to speak. It'll give me the opportunity to identify them and unmute their line and give them the opportunity to address you in either citizens forum or public comment. So I think I've covered everything as part of that housekeeping item. If you have any questions or need additional information, please let me know.
Okay, thank you, Mike. With that, we will move into the awards and proclamations.
Item 3.1, the day of June 6, 2020, as National Gun Violence Awareness Day in the city of Salina, Corey North with Moms Demand Action, Kansas Chapter, Salina Group will read the proclamation.
Okay. Yes, Miss.
So Corey is on the line. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, we're also advised that we should announce ourselves for those that are just listening on the phone. This is Mike Scragg, the city manager. If Corey is on the line, they need to press star 9 so I can identify them to read the proclamation. Here we go. Looks like Commissioner Davis, you've indicated you wish to speak.
I'm here just making sure that you can hear me.
Okay, sorry. Commissioner Davis, I'll leave you unmuted, so feel free to join the conversation. I do not see anything other than city staff and a couple of individuals that are not associated with the proclamation. So I think we may need to go ahead and read that on their behalf.
I'll go ahead and read the proclamation on behalf of Ms. North. So, proclamation. Whereas the first Saturday in June is National Gun Violence Awareness Day, to honor and remember all victims and survivors of gun violence, and to declare that we as a country must do more to reduce gun violence. And whereas mayors and law enforcement officers know their communities best, are the most familiar with local criminal activity and how to address it, and are best positioned to understand how to keep their citizens safe. And whereas support for the Second Amendment right of law-abiding citizens goes hand in hand with keeping guns away from dangerous people. And whereas in January 2013, Hadia Pendleton was tragically shot and killed by gang members in Chicago and should now be celebrating her 21st birthday. And whereas to honor Hadia, a national coalition of organizations has designated June 6, 2020, the first Saturday in June, as National Gun Violence Awareness Day. The idea was inspired by a group of Hadia's friends who asked their classmates to commemorate her life by wearing orange. They chose this color because hunters wear orange to announce themselves to other hunters when out in the woods, and orange is a color that symbolizes the value of human life. And whereas by wearing orange on June 6, 2020, Americans can join this campaign to help raise awareness about gun violence and honor the lives of gun violence victims and survivors. And whereas we renew our commitment to reduce gun violence and pledge to do all we can to keep firearms out of the wrong hands and encourage responsible gun ownership and to help keep our children safe. Now, therefore, I, Michael L. Hoppick, Mayor of the City of Salina, Kansas, do hereby proclaim June 6, 2020 as National Gun Violence Awareness Day in the city of Salina, and encourage all citizens to support their local community's efforts to prevent the tragic effects of gun violence and to honor and value human lives. In witness whereof, I hereunto set my hand and cause the seal of the city of Salina, Kansas, to be affixed on this first day of June 2020. And I guess I'm going to look around. Does anybody know if they have any events scheduled for Saturday?
Sorry, I do not.
Okay.
Do not either, other than wearing orange.
Wear orange, okay.
Did
So,
Ms. North come on the line possibly during the...
No, we had a couple of city departments come online, but I don't see her.
she may have thought the meeting was at 4, too.
It could
For that,
be,
we
yeah.
apologize if that was such. At this point, it's time to go to Citizens Forum. This is a time where citizens can call in and if they would like to talk about something that is not on the agenda. Do we have any callers, Mike?
We do. We have a caller ending in 5433. I've unmuted that line. Caller 5433, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, Commissioners. This is Joan Ratzlaff. There are a couple of things that are not on the agenda I wanted to speak to. And the first is in reference to a discussion that was a little over a month ago, and it had to do with the staffing adjustment for the COVID. And what the first thing before the discussion started had to do with restricting the Commission's discussion. So I want to say first that I appreciate that there are some gray areas. I asked for more information about the basis of that discussion, and I want to thank Commissioner Franz for giving me the code and that it was based on, so that I could read that for myself. And I still see gray areas, and I want to say, as you know, kind of repeat a theme that I said before, and that is, while I appreciate very much professionalism and dedication of our civil servants, our hired employees, and also the complexity and the responsibility of our city commissioners, who are just essentially volunteers. It's a tremendous amount of work, and it's very complicated. So I appreciate all that, and that's all in preamble. I have a little bit different opinion for how that played out as far as what the roles and responsibilities of the city manager and the city commission are. I think that it's not that cut and dried as saying the commission, as the commission saying these are the responsibilities of the city manager and we're not going to interfere because it's complicated and it's too much for us to understand. So I want to read part of where our code of what, just right out of the code, what it says. And first of all, where, if I haven't lost it because the wind blew some stuff away. Here we go. So Article 2, the Board of Commissioners, and it gives the state law reference of KSA 12-1006 at SEC and following. But when I went to the Kansas statutes, it said that had been repealed. So all the details that were in that authorizing that particular ordinance has been repealed. So I'm not sure what that, where we go with that. But back to our city ordinance. It says that all powers, Section 223, powers shall be exercised by their governing body insofar as they do not conflict with the authority delegated to the city manager. And the governing body has the duty to, and I'll select a couple of the 6, appoint the city manager, and be responsible for the city manager's efficient administration of the city's business. So there's some gray area in there. And number 6, under Section 223, determine after consideration of the recommendation of the city manager the city's plan for compensating its employees. Under Section 2-37, the powers and term of the, 2-38, the duties and functions of the city manager, and there are 7 listed. Number 6 is advising the governing body of the financial condition and needs of the city. And number 7 is making recommendations to the governing body on all matters concerning the welfare of the city. And so, again, it is, in my opinion, it is the responsibility of the governing body to hear what is said and do their best to understand the advice and the recommendations and evaluate that. And in order to do that, you need to be able to discuss and not limit that discussion. In Section 2-39, under management of departments of the city, it's one sentence. It says, no member of the governing body, and that's by individuals, shall directly interfere with the conduct of any department of the city except at the express direction of the governing body, which, to me, that pretty much implies that the governing body has the authority to, it says interfere with the conduct of the department of the city. The city manager serves at the pleasure of the governing body, and the governing body is elected by the city. So you go back to that hierarchy there where the citizens are over the city commissioners, when we go to the ballot box. So I just wanted to read that for folks so that because that's how I like to do. I like to go to the source instead of hear somebody's interpretation. I want to encourage my governing body to continue to do their best and maybe a little bit more to not delegate authority, but to listen to the advice and recommendations of the city manager, not just, the term is rubber stamp. So thank you for listening to that. And I hope that it's educational to anyone else who's listening in the citizenry.
Okay, thank you. Do we...
There was one other thing I'd like to bring up, and maybe for another time.
Joan, about...
And that is the standard traffic ordinance that was adopted, I think, probably a couple of years ago. Yeah, 2018 it was updated. And as a whole, it's a rather large document, but there were some changes in there that I think may not really apply very well to our city. And so I would like an opportunity to have particular ones of those reviewed. Can you suggest how we would go about that?
I would, Joan, this Mayor Hoppick, I would suggest you put those in writing, probably to the city manager's office, and he'll delegate those to who needs to review those and get them to us if we need to review those. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, and I'm sorry that the last, I guess,
Joan, your 5 minutes is, Joan?
Having to do with our reduction.
Can she not hear me?
Again. And I almost forgot this one, where we had to reduce staffing, and it looked like we were reducing contractual services, but from the discussion that I heard, it sounded like we were not considering reduction of the legal contract. And it had not ever been reviewed. So I want to ask that the governing body consider an annual review of that contract just like any other one.
Okay, Joan, that's been considerably over your 5 minutes, so we'll take that under consideration. So, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay,
very
thank you.
much. Appreciate your service.
Do we have any other callers, Mike?
If there's anybody else that wishes to address the commission, please press star 9. I don't see anybody at the moment, but give them just a little bit. And
As
when
we're-
our call started, it reminded me, I forgot to mention, if you get on the line, please turn down whatever sound you have other than the phone call in the background to avoid feedback. But it doesn't look like we have any other callers.
Okay, before we move into to our regular meeting under Citizens Forum, I'd like to just make a short comment that I prepared, and that is, as we all know, our country is currently in a state of unrest following the death of George Floyd. I would like to thank all of those involved with the light up the night at Caldwell Plaza Saturday evening, and those who participated in the march Sunday for their courteous and respectful behavior. I think both of these events spoke well of Salina. We as a city are currently investing a significant amount of money in a police training facility. I believe that this investment will help us in situational training, which will hopefully help us avoid any incidents like the one in Minneapolis. I think we all pray that our country may heal and we can all become united as one. I know that I'm going to ask Mr. Scragg to just comment briefly. I know we're putting out a press release on behalf of the police department, and you might want to address that for us also, Mike.
Sure. Chief Nelson and I spoke over the weekend, and he and I got together this morning. He had drafted, I guess you'd say a press release, but acknowledging, number one, it's an unacceptable and unnecessary tragedy, and then explaining our approach as it relates to our training, everything from how to recognize and avoid bias-based policing and how to ensure objective policing, as well as walking through some of our policies and protocols as it relates to physical use of force and review of use of force and obligation of all officers on the scene to be mindful of that and intervene if there's anything inappropriate, all the way to every use of force being reviewed by the chief of police and some of our accreditation process that we go through. So trying to explain what we have in place for to try to prevent what happened in Minneapolis. And we also spoke about and plan to share that I think some of our priorities are, number one, continuing to review our training approach and make sure that it's appropriate and up to date. Number two, looking at our organizational culture to make sure that we're aware of any issues or concerns that might be there. Ensuring that we have accountability throughout the organization, not just at an extreme circumstance like this, but that's something that's communicated and the expectations are clear. And then lastly, this just heightens the need for ongoing communication and dialogue. And there are some avenues, and I know the school districts got an approach in place. And what we've talked about is what we can be doing, not just as it focuses on the police department, but how it might focus on offerings that the city of Salina has for different segments of our community and different issues, whether that be water service to law enforcement, you name it. So trying to, number one, acknowledge that that was completely a tragedy. Number two, kind of underscore what's in place today and then reassure that we understand the significance of it and we're committed to ongoing review and improvement.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, with that, we will move into the consent agenda.
Cheryl Murmas, Deputy City Clerk. Item 6.1, approve the minutes of May 18, 2020. Item 6.2, approve the minutes of May 26, 2020. And item 6.3, approve the minutes of the May 28, 2020.
Okay, do we have any items that a commissioner would like removed or any corrections or additions? Okay, if not, I'd accept a motion to approve.
Commissioner Hodges, Mayor Hoppick, I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Commissioner Franz, second.
Mayor Hoppick, we have a first and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0. Okay, that leads us into administration.
Cheryl Murmas, Deputy City Clerk. Item 7.1, first reading ordinance number 20-11032, terminating the Lambertz addition, Kohl's tax increment financing project, redevelopment district.
Ms. Pack.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Debbie Pack, Director of Finance and Administration. I'm glad and happy to be here today to give you some good news once. Back in December of 2017, the then governing body adopted Ordinance 07-10428 establishing the redevelopment district known as the Lambertz TIF. It was a site for the new Kohl store to be built on. They also authorized the issuance of bonds by the City of Salina to reimburse expenditures for the project. On December 8th, 2008, the city actually issued those bonds in an amount of $3,525,000 to be repaid over 20 years using the incremental sales tax and property tax generated by that development district. The bonds were originally scheduled to pay off in 2028. However, with higher than anticipated revenues and a refinancing that we took advantage of in 2016, this has enabled the city to pay off this debt 8 years earlier than originally scheduled. Once the bonds are paid off, any remaining funds being held by the trustee will come back to the city and be distributed back to the taxing entities that those funds would have originally belonged to. The city is currently holding about $40,000 of sales tax that we have not sent to the trustee because we knew we had enough in there to actually pay for those. So those funds will go back into the general fund and the sales tax capital fund. Once terminated, staff anticipates that we will be able to redirect about $160,000 to the general fund and about $100,000 to the sales tax capital fund per year. In addition to the sales tax, approximately $50,000 in property tax will be directed to the city's funds. Staff has identified the following options for City Commission's consideration. Approve ordinance number 20-11032 on first reading, terminating Lambertz addition tax increment finance project development district. Approve the ordinance with amendments the City Commission deems appropriate. Postpone consideration to a specific time and date and provide staff with direction regarding additional information or amendments the City Commission would like. Approve ordinance 20-11032 on first reading and provide direction regarding additional information that you would like prior to second reading, or vote to deny the ordinance and leaving the redevelopment district active as it is. Staff recommends option number 1. I would stand for any questions.
I just have one, sorry, Commissioner Hodges. I just have one quick question. I noticed that on the ordinance, it says the date that it references on the ordinance was June 8th. And I didn't know if there was a reason for making that June 8th as opposed to today's date?
Because that'll be the date that we do the second reading.
Okay.
And that'll be when it's actually adopted.
Okay, I
asked
gotcha.
the same question.
Well, no, I was wondering, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Franz, were these numbers included in the financial projections regarding the COVID, or will this be some additional revenue we might could?
No, unfortunately, we did include those numbers in the projections, especially I know in the sales tax capital fund, and I believe we also included them in the general fund, but I'm not sure. I know the sales tax capital fund.
So we were anticipating this at that time already?
Yes, we've known for several months it would pay off early.
I'm going to make a suggestion that's sort of out of left field on this, and that is, I would suggest that $100,000 that is referenced here as sales tax capital, that be redirected to economic development, and I think we have the ability to do that, and that it be allocated to the child care project.
If you'd like, I think we can staff that through and bring that back to you as an action
I think
item.
it's obviously money that we hadn't anticipated before, and I know that economic development fund is stretched, but this would be a way of taking a resource we hadn't been anticipating there and moving it towards that project, which, of course, the Economic Development Group has recommended we do, and that we, I believe at a study session, were fairly positive about proceeding.
If it's this is Mike Scragg, City Manager. If it's acceptable, we can kind of work through the financial analysis of not only the Economic Development Fund, but kind of our COVID-19 response and prepare that as an action item for you.
Commissioner Hodges, I mean, just from what Ms. Pack said, though, it looks like we've anticipated having this, this revenue coming back to us, and I'd like to take another look at it and make sure that this is the area of greatest need before we go down that path. So, I mean, I'm fine proceeding with the ordinance today, but I think it might warrant just a little bit more discussion and research in terms of, I don't want to spend something that we haven't actually realized yet. I guess that's where my reluctance is, but I agree that it's a great cause.
Commissioner Franz, I don't disagree. I just think that is one of the things that ought to be on the table for this, as opposed to just throwing it back into the capital fund.
Commissioner Davis, Commissioner Franz, I can't get all the words in. Where did you want to redirect the funds to?
I suggested that we consider redirecting the funds to the economic development portion of the sales tax, and further that it be used to support the child care system, as we've said was a priority for us earlier.
Thank you.
I agree with both of you if that's possible, but again, we might be somewhat premature in moving that, but I think it's worth looking at, and maybe down the road a little bit if we look like our income is where we want it to be. That because as we've all discussed, the child care is mainly if you're looking at economic development in the community, it's one of our major drawbacks. So
Commissioner Ryan here, I agree with what's been said, but I'd like to have staff sort of review those options. So, in light of what we've been through with COVID-19, I'd just like to back up and review where that money could be used.
So, Mike Scraig here. I don't know that you need a separate motion. I think I can sense the consensus, and we'll staff it through for you.
Yeah, as we move through. So, do we have anyone?
This is Debbie Pack again. I'll just mention that these bonds don't actually pay off until July 1st, so it's likely that we will not know what that kind of excess funding is until that time, because we'll continue to earn interest and things like that. We're anticipating what that number might be, but at that time, we would have a better idea of what that is, and we can certainly staff through the sales tax.
So basically in August, and we'd have several months of sales tax and stuff behind us that we'd have a little better idea maybe.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yes.
Mayor Hoppick here, do we have any callers on the line that would like to address this?
We do have some callers on the line. If they wish to address you, they need to press *9. I don't see anyone.
Okay, if not, I will bring it back to the commission for action.
Commissioner Hodges, I move that we approve ordinance number 20-11032, terminating the Lambertz Addition Tax Increment Financing Project Development District.
Commissioner Ryan, second.
Mayor Hoppick, we have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 20-11032. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, that passes 5-0. That will move us into 7.2.
Cheryl Mermis, Deputy City Clerk. Item 7.2, resolution number 20-7837, authorizing the mayor to execute an amendment to the transferee agreement with JKSK Corporation regarding the construction of the Barillo Grill.
Okay, Mr. Scragg.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This relates to amendment of the transferee agreement with Barillo Grill regarding their completion date. They are nearing completion, and we've discussed the details of the development agreement and supplemental agreement each time that we've had an amendment to a transferee agreement. So I'm going to try to summarize a little bit more briefly and be happy to answer any questions that you might have. But as I believe you should recall, we initially entered into a development agreement with the master developer, Salina 2020, in January of 2017, and that spelled out the broad framework of the Starbound project in the downtown, and there was a recognition at that time that there was additional details that would have to be addressed in a supplemental agreement, which was approved in October of 2017. And that those agreements were written as if the master developer had universal rights and obligations. I mean, everything that was in that development agreement was worded as if the master developer would do each different project and task. And there was a recognition that those rights could then be assigned from the master developer to another party. And so that's why the transferee agreements are referred to as transferee agreements. They're transferring certain rights and obligations of the master developer to individual projects. And so over the course of the project, we've had a handful of transferee agreements executed with the Alley and Old Chicago and the Car Museum and Barillo Grill, and we've had a handful of amendments to those transferee agreements as the timelines played out and needed to be adjusted. So we then also had to negotiate issuance of the STAR bonds to implement the essence of the development agreement. And the STAR bond issuance was very dependent on the financial forecasting that was done, and we ended up with an escrowing approach that created different tranches of issuance and imposed conditions that certain projects and conditions had to be met before releases of some of those escrowed funds. So the second amendment to the development agreement related to the escrowing and distribution of the funds, and that document was 2,045 pages long. I didn't attach it in its entirety, but I did attach some excerpts to the staff report. So on November of 2018, a transferee agreement was entered into with the master developers and JKSK Corporation regarding renovation and development of the Barillo Grill at 112 South Santa Fe. And it was based on the template transfer agreement, and that was used for the other projects such as the Homewood Suites Hotel and the Alley in Old Chicago. I had provided a copy of that transfer agreement, and I also provided an excerpt that spells out the performance milestones. The two key milestones in each of the transfer agreements are the commencement date and the completion date. When we started out with the Barillo Grill agreement, the identified commencement date was December 17th of 2018, and the identified completion date was June 30th of 2019. And then the agreements provided for provisions if they failed to comply with the performance milestones, and there were percentage reductions in their available financial incentives or funds if they failed to meet the milestones. At the time the transferee agreements were written, they didn't necessarily account for the escrow aspects of the bond issuance and how everything kind of got interrelated. And so as I go on in the staff report, I point out that the escrow project fund is developed as part of that document that I referred to, and it identifies an escrow release date of October 15th of 2020, and it spells out escrow release conditions related to the Alley, a first general escrow release condition associated with the hotel project, excluding Yaya's Bistro and Starbucks, a second general escrow release condition, meaning the hotel, including Yaya's and Starbucks, and Old Chicago Restaurant all being open for business. And then the third general escrow release condition was the completion of those projects as well as the Barillo Grill. And so recently, Salina 20, and so each of those projects have kind of been progressing in that order. As you may recall, we amended the transferee agreement for the hotel project and in recognition of their near completion. And you may be aware that Starbucks is now open. So the third general escrow release condition is the one that involves the Barillo Grill, and that frees up the last tranche of funding, which includes $2 million of funding for the city's streetscape project, basically to reimburse us for some of our expense for the streetscape project. So we did attach some photos of the progress of the Barillo Grill just to give you a sense of where they're at and how near they are to completion. And they've indicated they've requested an August 1st completion date, and based on reviewing both the exterior and the interior, that seems very plausible for them to complete. With respect to the fiscal note, The requested amendment doesn't necessarily have a direct or quantifiable fiscal cost. The financial impacts of the delayed completion, as well as the impacts of the coronavirus, are difficult to quantify, but without a doubt, we had the financial feasibility study that was done, and we had a timeline, and each one of these extensions of transferee agreements sets back that timeline, and that increment generation, and then the pandemic certainly called into question completion of some of those projects and then reopening of some of the projects that had completed. So as I noted, the Barillo Grill project is a required project associated with the third general escrow release, and it will then entitle us for the $2 million of our proceeds. And with respect to the Star Bond performance more generally, we continue to monitor performance, and we'll continue to provide you with updates. We have been in contact with our bond counsel and our financial advisors about available funds in terms of the debt service reserve and the funds that are on hand. And so I think Ms. Pack has previously reported we have sufficient funds in those reserves to continue to make payments through this year and into next year, and that's not accounting for what increment might be generated in the downtown Star Bond district. So I believe there's a representative of the project on the line that's prepared to address you as well, but we prepared and attached resolution number 207837 for your consideration. The options that we've identified for you are to approve that resolution as it's presented. You could approve it with the amendments as you deem appropriate. You could postpone its consideration to a specified date and time and provide additional direction, or you could take no further action, and I just saw a typo here, resulting in the Barillo Grill transferee agreement remaining unchanged. In light of the escrow structure that was executed and is in place, staff recommends option number 1, to continue to proceed with the project and ensure its completion by the escrow deadlines. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, and as I said, I believe we've got a representative on the project on the line that may wish to address you or answer questions as well.
Questions for staff on this side?
Commissioner Franz, I am presuming that the Barillo Grill does not actually receive any Star Bond proceeds. It's simply that they have to achieve completion before Star Bond proceeds are released to others, including the city, for the $2 million that will be applied to the bonds for the streetscape.
Correct. The Barillo,
Okay.
the structure of the incentives to the Barillo Grill is pay-as-you-go, so that income that proceed needs to be generated.
Okay, let me be clear. Those are not bond proceeds. Those are proceeds from the TIF district and the CID district.
Correct.
When you talk about pay-as-you-go. So that's future payments out of the sales tax stream generated by those two districts.
Correct.
Okay. Now, when we get the $2 million for the streetscape, since we've already sold those bonds, how is that going to be applied to the bonds? Is that going to be an early call on outstanding bonds, or are we simply going to apply that to the annual payments? And my point is, the longer this delays, the more interest cost we have incurred on that bond issue.
Right. I see Ms. Pack is out of the room, but on the phone. Debbie, I see that you've indicated you wish to respond.
Yes, this is Debbie Pack, Director of Revenue. I just want to let you know, when we issued the bonds for the streetscape, we only issued $10.5 million, and that project was a $12.5 million project. So that $2 million is actually going back to pay cost of the project that was not financed.
Commissioner Franz, so it's true that that $2 million is still accruing interest?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Hodges. Okay, so the original completion date was basically almost a year ago, June 30th of 2019. And I see that, you know, we've looked at extensions before, and there are, you know, the failure to timely complete, and I think it goes up to maybe like 180 days or something like that, basically 6 months. I guess my question is, obviously at some point, the master developer, staff or whatever, commissioners for that matter, didn't we get a sense that obviously that June 30th, 2019 date had gone sailing by, and we might need to take another look at this about extending the completion date for the transferee agreement?
We did. A lot of that conversation happened as that escrow arrangement was being set up, and we certainly could have come back and amended this sooner. I think with the conversation, there was a recognition of the interrelationship from the projects, and we were focusing on the hotel and completion of some of the other projects, and looking to this timeline as it related to that escrow release date of October of this year, but we certainly could have received and processed a request for amendment sooner.
And Commissioner Hodges, and that kind of goes to my next question, which I understand. I'm a broken record. I've been asking this about all of these transferee agreements that, we've had to amend completion dates on, in that we're amending a completion date, and yet, and I know you all have explained this to me again, there's no critical path schedule that is attached to this agreement. So, it's all very well and good to say that, we've had delays and it's going to result in a completion date of X. But in my mind, it would be helpful to be able to take a look at those critical path schedules and say, okay, here's where it broke down and here's why it broke down, as opposed to ran into some problems and going to need more time. It's not specifically directed at the Barillo Grill, because it's something that I've noticed or noted in our other review of transferee agreements for extensions. Having, once the contracts have been let, once all that work has been done, at some point, does a critical path schedule get added back into that agreement? I mean, does one exist?
Yeah, that is, Mike Scragg here, that is what's contemplated as part of the transferee agreement. And you referenced kind of the prior explanation. You're correct. The way the transferee agreement's written, it's not necessarily anticipated on the front end, but at the point that a contract is entered into, the presumption is there is a critical path schedule that could be shared and attached. And that has not happened on a couple of prior projects. I've discussed with the master developer how we do that going forward, but we're not provided, nor did we seek a critical path schedule for this project.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. I guess the critical date is the October 15th of 2020 date.
At this point, for us and for the release of the escrow funds, that would be correct. If that date is missed, as we looked at kind of the impacts of the pandemic, and as we, considered the impacts it might have, we did reach out to bond counsel and our financial advisors about that date and whether that could be adjusted. And with the bonds being sold and the documentation that was in place, their response was that really couldn't be amended without the consent of all the bondholders, and so that was a pretty heavy lift. But so you're correct, that October 15th date.
So the October 15th date is the kind of, I'll call it drop dead date, that we have to have all those projects completed.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions for staff? If not, Mike, is there anyone on the phone that would like to comment?
I believe there is a representative on the phone. If they wish to comment, they need to press *9. There we go. Caller ending in 8294, you are unmuted. If you would, please be sure to turn down any background audio from the meeting to avoid feedback, and go ahead.
This is Jeff Mace with Compo Realty, representing Barillo Grill, or JKSK. I don't really have a lot more to add. I'm certainly willing to give any more background that you would like, but it looks like you've got a pretty heavy schedule, so I'm just happy to stand for any questions that I might or might not be able to answer.
Commissioner Hodges here. Mr. Mays, thank you for taking our questions. To your knowledge, is there a critical path schedule that exists for this project?
I believe, Commissioner Hodges, I believe that there was one when it started. There was a thing that's had a number of calamities or errors that have occurred, but one of which was in the middle of this project, or towards the front of the project, I guess, in construction, who was contracted to purchase or to build the property. They sold out, and schedules got completely blown up, and I have not seen a critical path schedule is a very specific construction schedule, which sounds as if you're aware. And, I have not seen such a thing. We're now down to a place where we've got to get flooring in and drop ceiling tiles and things of that nature, so I just can't speak to that. I know there was one early, and then in construction got bought or sold, or there was a transaction there, and so these two companies' construction schedules all went together, and that was a contributing factor to our delay. Not 100% of it, but certainly a contributing factor to the delay. So I can't answer that question.
Thank you.
Commissioner Franz, this is actually a question for staff. So what is the current completion date and what will the new one be? I can't see that anywhere in the commission information sheet.
The original completion date was June 30th of last year, and the
Okay.
proposed completion date is August 1st of this year.
Okay, so they're actually well past the original completion date.
Correct.
But the October 15th date is not changing.
Right. The October
Okay.
15th date is associated with the bond issuance and the escrow
Okay.
provisions.
Thank you.
Mayor Hoppick here. Mr. Mays, when did they actually start construction on this? It wasn't...
One of the other things that occurred, Mayor Hoppick, was, and I'm not exactly sure what date they started. They were delayed, but one of the things we ran into, basically had to redraw the whole thing. We got in there, and as you know, we combined a couple buildings, and engineering got in, and what we were planning on doing from the RTUs and the air handlers for the hoods and all of that did not work, and we had to basically start completely over with plans. That cost us 90 days early, and then we had and while that was happening, we had the construction. I don't know what our exact start date was. If you look at the photos, and I'm happy to take any of you that would like to see it in advance, but like I said, they're basically done. They've got to get flooring down, clean up, and drop ceiling tiles, but all the mechanicals in, the RTUs are in, all the hoods are in place, millwork's done, painting's done, restrooms are done. I would anticipate fully that they will run ahead of the August 1 proposed date.
Any other questions?
The general contractor did not start on time due to the transaction from what was contracted.
Any other questions for Mr. Mays? Thank you for calling in.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate your help.
Okay, any other comments, Mike, from anyone?
If anyone else wishes to comment, they need to press, looks like Mr. Mays.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't know what I needed to do on my end to mute. I hit *9 again. I apologize.
Okay. If there's anyone else that wishes to comment, they need to press *9 now. I don't see anyone.
Okay, without any other comments, I will bring it back to the commission for action.
This is Commissioner Ryan, Mayor Hoppick. I move we approve resolution number 207837.
Commissioner Franz, second.
Mayor Hoppick, we have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 20-7837. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, that passes 4-1. Okay, that will lead us into 7.3.
Cheryl Murmas, Deputy City Clerk. Item 7.3, reconsider the restriction on the use of plastic bags included in the authorization to reopen the Salina Drive Thru Recycling Center.
Okay.
Is this on?
Jim. It was
Might have
earlier.
a button there.
All right, the green light's on, so I'll assume it's on. Jim Kowatz, Public Works Director. Mayor and Commissioners, good to see you again. We have had quite a month looking at all the contracts and the people and the staffing, and we've talked about a lot of things. You covered a lot of material back on May 11th, and at that time, it was voted to reopen the recycling center with restrictions. And I'd like to apologize for not speaking up or for misinforming you at that meeting. After visiting with staff and and fielding just a lot of calls from the public, there's a lot of concern about the restriction of not allowing the use of plastic bags when we reopen. We plan to reopen with restricted hours. We do plan to use multiple trucks to try to limit the traffic or the backups, but we are concerned that there may be times when people have to wait, and we were concerned about if people waited in line and then found out they couldn't leave us their materials because they were in plastic bags, that it would not go over well and we would have a lot of unhappy consumers. I talked to staff, talked to our sanitation superintendent, and I didn't realize that over half the people are using plastic bags, and half the people reuse those plastic bags. They have the heavier contractor bags and reuse them. So there's a lot of people that use the bags. We've been closed over 8 weeks, voiced a lot of phone calls or fielded a lot of phone calls that people have garages full of stuff. We definitely want the materials in containers rather than loose. Plastic bags, staff doesn't feel are much different than handling boxes or bins or tubs, the way a lot of people bring their materials in. So we are respectfully asking that you reconsider the restriction on plastic bags, and if not permanently, at least temporarily, as we reopen, because we are expecting quite a bit of material to come in the first few weeks. There are no financial impacts to it. As far as health concerns, the CDC has issued some new information that they're kind of downplaying the transfer of the COVID virus by direct contact and emphasizing the direct transmission by personal contact. And we will do everything we can to limit the personal contact when we're working with our customers at the SDRC. With that, I'll field any questions or comments that you have. Thank you.
Questions, comments?
Commissioner Franz, I actually, and I apologize if we made a mistake at the last meeting when we discussed this. I actually went back and reviewed the tape, and I still came away with the sense that staff didn't want to handle plastic bags, even though that was not a part, to be totally fair, not a part of the recommendation that was provided in the request for commission action. So if we misunderstood that, if I misunderstood that, I guess I shouldn't apologize for anybody else. If I misunderstand that, I apologize. But I had a clear, you know, if you'd asked me 2 days later, I'd say, oh yeah, staff recommended not doing plastic bags.
And that was our mistake.
To be fair, you never did say that explicitly, and it's not in the commission information memorandum, but just the tone of the discussion
Right.
and the questions and the direction the discussion took, I simply walked away with that misunderstanding. So, and it's pretty clear that there's a lot of people who were counting on using plastic bags to transport their material, and I would like to apologize to them too, because it was not our intent to make things more difficult for that many people. You know, I simply misunderstood the circumstances, I think.
Mayor Hoppick here. I'm going to jump in here because I, much like Commissioner Franz, was under the impression that that's what we didn't want, because we talked about how they were going to have to tear the bags open. And I admit, I'm a recycler. I've got a lot of boxes in my garage now, but I voted completely against it for that reason, is that we were going to allow, you know, was one of them, because I didn't want us using plastic. And then one of the other things that has been made apparent, and I'm not going to tell you how to handle this, but it's the fact that some of our staff will have to be handling loose items in trunks and trunks and pickups, that aren't even in sacks. I'm not sure how you address that, but I think that'd be something staff would want to address from a safety standpoint. So
Generally, they use just a smaller box to scoop it out and put it in a container.
but if it's in a pickup bed, you can scoot it.
Right.
You can scoop it out. In a trunk, you couldn't if it's just stuff laying there. But anyway, I'm a little bit like Commissioner Franz. I kind of had the impression that plastic bags was something we didn't want to deal with. As far as that goes, to just limit using plastic bags for a limited period of time seems kind of if you're going to do it, you might as well do it from now on out, because I don't see the use in just doing it for a short period of time. So,
Commissioner Hodges, I would just like to say I agree with Commissioner France and Mayor Hoppick, the remarks that have been made. Something that made a big impression on me, though, when we had that presentation, and I didn't realize this happened, was looking at the mountains of trash bags that some people drop off. And maybe that's more from like commercial operations, small commercial operations that drop off. There were mountains of bags in those pictures. And so I guess my question is, I'm happy to defer to whatever staff would like to deal with. But as we have people coming in, assuming with lots and lots of bags, I just don't want to create an issue where, we're getting toward the end of the day and we have an entire building that's full of bags that are then going to need to be emptied. And I'm just, are we planning on having the customers, wait until all those bags have been emptied? Because I just don't want to create another issue for staff at the end of the day where, we have to close down the recycling center at an hour early in order to wade through all the trash. Because I know that the staffing time is an issue too. We've talked about, the reduced hours.
Well, there's several questions there. One, first and foremost, I want to thank the mayor and commissioners for just their concern over our employees and our employees' health, because I did appreciate that. I did mislead you as far as the plastic bags, and I didn't understand how many people actually use them. But the pictures with the bags laying around, that is pretty rare. That when we get traffic backed up out onto Santa Fe or North Street, sometimes they would use just put the bags down and let people cycle through. Using 2 trucks, we do plan on trying to empty the bags and return anything that's not acceptable back to the customers. Provide good customer service, but also limit the number of people that are backed up into the street. And then because we are operating under reduced hours, we'll have two trucks operating to try to minimize the amount of wait time for people. But the plastic bags, they don't necessarily tear them open all the times. A lot of times they'll just dump them and then put them back in the vehicle because there's a large percentage of people that actually reuse them. So,
Commissioner Hodges, just maybe going forward in the future, it might be helpful for us to know what would be the easiest methods for staff to handle in terms of accepting recycling. If there are consumers that come in with an entire pickup bed full of materials that staff either has to get a box and scoop out or get actually physically into the bed of the pickup truck. I would just like you to know that if we need to, maybe not just all of a sudden put in these parameters, but if there are parameters that we need to put in place in order to make sure that the Drive Thru Recycling Center is operating smoothly and efficiently, and we're keeping a flow coming through, I think that that's something, I don't know, I can't speak for the other commissioners, but if we need to have that conversation in the future, once it resumes, I'd be open to doing that.
Commissioners, Mike Scraig here. I think staff is pretty responsive to kind of the changing circumstances in general at the drop-off recycling center, and this kind of necessitates being even a little bit more flexible. As you referred to the mountains of plastic bags, the mountain may be bigger here for a little while as people have been storing up their recyclables. But for the most part, we try to be as accommodating as possible and try to communicate any changes in approach or requirements proactively. So I think we'll continue to try to troubleshoot. If something becomes problematic and we need additional policy guidance or funding in particular, or, a modification of the facility, we might bring that back. But as individual circumstances arise, we'll try to deal with them at the staff level. We really weren't anticipating the plastic bag conversation being part of the motion previously, and we're just trying to kind of address that so that we can accommodate our customers the best we can.
Any other questions?
Echoing everybody else, I appreciate your staff bringing that back to us. And I'd just like to say it out loud, probably, the bag thing, and the other thing I've been asked the most is, when is the center going to open? So since the Journal probably won't get this, you are planning June 3rd, which would be Wednesday.
This Wednesday, yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to put that out there for people to hear it.
And to confirm the hours?
8 to 4.
Thank you.
And then 8,
Commissioner Davis here.
yes.
I'm glad we brought this back. As far as the mountain of bags, I think you're going to find a lot of people will want their plastic bags back, just so the plastic bag does not become part of the trash. And over time, if people can switch to clear plastic bags, it makes it easier when you're dumping the bag to see something in there that might not be acceptable. Now, a piece of styrofoam, for example, may have slipped in with some plastic or tin cans. I switched to the commercial service J&M to start picking my stuff up, and they use plastic bags, and it's a good opportunity when you're loading the bag up to see if there's something in there that doesn't belong in there. But I don't know if you're going to find a germ-free way of handling trash, even before this viral pandemic. But most of, if the bag's not tied very tight at the top, you just hold it by the bottom and dump it out. And like I said, if I took my stuff down there, I would want the bag back. But I think it should go fairly smoothly. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. Do we have any callers on the line, Mike, that would like to comment?
We have some callers. If they wish to speak on this topic, please press star 9 to indicate you'd like to speak. Ms. Ratzlaff, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Joan, are you there?
Yes, thank you. I couldn't hear all of what you said. The speakerphone is not always the best. Thank you. I wanted to hear confirmation that non-recyclable materials such as bags that the materials are brought in are returned to the customer.
If that's the customer's wish, yes.
And if they don't want it back, it becomes trash.
Correct?
Yes.
Well, have we explored the possibility of partnering with any commercial entities that do recycle plastic bags, such as Dillon's or other stores?
This is Jim Kowatz. No, we have not.
Okay, well, I'll just open that up as a possibility to consider. And maybe look into that. We don't want the plastic bags going to our MRF, obviously, because of the problems they cause there. But maybe there is some way that we can recycle what plastic bags we get. I know that the Volunteer Center in Wichita recycles plastic bags that are, the stretchy plastic bags. Which brings me to my other question, and that is, other recycling centers that are, not transfer centers, like really ours is a transfer station, not a recycling center, because all we do is transfer these materials to someplace where they're sorted and baled and sold. So my question is, has the City Commission, the governing body, asked for any further information about changing our system to something more sustainable, something that doesn't use as much fuel and doesn't cost the citizens as much?
Commissioner Hodges, didn't we have, I think we had some discussion about that at a meeting when we started looking at the implications of the COVID-19 on the functions and the finances of the city. But I'm not sure that there was a consensus at that time to look at reevaluating how we handle our recycling. And if I'm not stating that the way others remember it, feel free.
Mayor Hoppick here. I'd say at this point, we do not have that on our agenda of items to review. Would that sound correct, Mr. Kovich?
We did get the sense that there were multiple commissioners that would like to review our operation, and it is our intent to come back towards the end of the year and just review all of our financials, the trends, the tonnages, the costs, the balances, because that is all information you will need to consider as we approach the end of our 3-year lease, and the decision will need to be made whether or not we continue to lease it, we purchase it, or we do something different.
Right.
So that is our plan, is to bring it back to you towards the end of the year.
That's the end of the year, yeah.
In
That's what I was
preparation of that,
thinking. We
so.
didn't have anything right now that we were
Right.
addressing, so.
Right.
So,
Nothing immediate.
Mr. Asloff, we'll be addressing that, it sounds like, at the end of the year as we move forward. Okay.
Mr. Kowach, I wanted to tell our governing body that, and I think that lease ends in what, June of 2021?
Correct.
So I'm looking forward to having a plan to change an operation and not continue to use that building for its present purpose. Well before that time, to find another location to have in my opinion, a more sustainable type of operation. I want to repeat that the manager of the Abilene Center has offered and continues to be available to come and speak to the governing body and tell, the facts about their operation, and is very much supported by their public works director. That's just one example that's very close to us, that I think might be a good model for us to look at. So I encourage you, I couldn't be more strongly, to look at however we can operate an actual recycling center and reduce our fuel usage and, make it something that benefits our city more. I understand that our current system is very popular because it is extremely convenient. And, it's wonderful that way, but we need to balance that with our personal and our community responsibility.
Okay, thank you. Mike,
Thank you.
Are there any other callers that would like to comment?
If there's anyone else that wishes to comment, please press star 9. I don't see anyone.
Okay, with that, I will bring it back to the commission.
Commissioner Ryan, Mayor Hoppick, I move we authorize staff at the SDRC to accept materials and plastic bags when it reopens June 3rd, 2020.
Commissioner Hodges, second.
Mayor Hoppick here. We have a motion and a second to authorize staff of the SDRC to accept materials in plastic bags when it reopens June 3rd, 2020. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes 5-0.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We will move into 7.4.
Cheryl Murmas, Deputy City Clerk. Item 7.4, review and consider baseball and softball improvement agreements.
Mr. Scragg.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Mike Scragg, City Manager. again, I assume that you're pretty aware of this, the history leading up to this, but I'll try to summarize it briefly. We were approached last year about, or you took under consideration last year, a public-private partnership proposal where Salina Baseball Enterprises proposed to raise $4 million of private funds and donations for improvements to Dean Evans Stadium, East Crawford Recreation, and Bill Burke baseball and softball fields, and asking us to provide a $4 million match to that proposal. And as I'm sure you recall, in that budget cycle, preparing the 2020 budget, we had $37.8 million of unfunded budget requests that we were trying to address or prioritize, and staff led you through some extensive discussions and prioritization exercises, and polled you and did some spreadsheet work to try to narrow that down. And this project was identified as a priority. You had discussions about raising the city's portion of that contribution through an increased transient guest tax, and you passed Resolution 197722, indicating your intent and providing direction regarding entering into an agreement with Salina Baseball Enterprises. Following the passage of that resolution, staff and legal counsel began meeting with representatives of Salina Baseball Enterprises on a weekly basis to work out the scoping and cost estimate details related to the entire extent of the project, as well as things such as naming rights and donations and scheduling priority, that type of thing. So we were very close to, in fact, we brought to you a near final draft of an agreement, and you provided additional direction, which we were working on when the coronavirus pandemic hit, and it refocused us on and looking at our finances and making significant adjustments to the 2020 budget. As I'm sure you recall, this was one of the projects that we listed and reviewed as we looked at pending capital improvement expenditures, and you indicated a desire to reconsider it in 90 days. And so based on the timing of that conversation happening March 25th, that 90 days would be June 25th of this year. In the intervening time, representatives of Salina Baseball Enterprises have contacted staff about indicating their desire to move forward with the renovations to Dean Evans Stadium, being turfing and restroom improvements, and they indicated their willingness to fund the renovations entirely with private donations and not requiring any financial contribution from the city. They've indicated that their request is only for Dean Evans and not for any of the other fields at East Crawford or Bill Burke. And as you may recall, we had a scope and cost estimates attached to that near final agreement that we brought you previously, and a portion of that scope is attached to the staff report as the proposed work that they're now focusing on. And so that estimated cost is $1.8 million. They've indicated that they're concerned about the potential of missing another year of construction, and they feel strongly that we need to move forward to retain the 4A state baseball tournament and softball tournaments in Salina. And they did indicate they're hopeful that once the economy recovers and we get through this, we can revisit the transient guest tax approach and the proceeds and talk about picking up the rest of the project or the partnership. As I mentioned, there's attached to my staff report the project scope that was originally proposed and the portion of that is what they're proposing at this point. They've indicated that their donors do remain committed to the project, and you may recall that part of this was a prioritization system of scheduling of fields in return for donors and in recognition of donors and their level of contribution. So they're still interested in proceeding in that manner, and so we need to work out those details. I'm repeating myself, but they're not asking for any financial commitment from the city at this time. The revised request has been put on your agenda so that you can provide direction as to whether you'd like staff and legal counsel to prepare a modified agreement approach for your future consideration. With respect to the fiscal note, the numbers that we've shared with you are based on Salina Baseball Enterprises cost estimates and scope. I think as we get into that a little bit further, they'll refine the design and bids and like any project that may be subject to fluctuation. And we've talked at length, you as a governing body, about your concern about taking on additional maintenance responsibility or deferred maintenance. And certainly, turf represents less maintenance on the front end, but it does carry with it a replacement cost. Salina Baseball Enterprises approached you or discussed that with you in their last before you in terms of the life cycle. You indicated some concern about that and some interest in trying to address that in some way, and staff had quite a few conversations with Salina Baseball Enterprises about fee structure and possible life cycle of turf. They did indicate their intention was to purchase additional turf that could replace the pitching mound and batter's box and possibly baselines, but recognized that there would be a wear and tear and the need for replacement. So at this point, we don't have an agreement for you in final form to sign off on. We're more asking you whether that is something that you wish to pursue at this time in light of previously setting it back to 90 days and for further review in 90 days, and in light of Salina Baseball Enterprises' request. So the options that I identified for your consideration were to vote to indicate your concurrence with the proposed approach and authorize staff to coordinate with representatives of Salina Baseball Enterprises to prepare a revised agreement for your future consideration. You can provide direction to staff regarding amendments or alternate approaches. You could postpone further consideration to a specified date and time and task us with identifying and bringing back additional information, or you could withhold concurrence with the proposed approach, and given your prior direction, then staff would be bringing this back to you, more of a financial update, and for your further consideration on June 25th. I do know that the staff recommends option number one. We're certainly willing to meet with Salina Baseball Enterprises and consider an alternate approach. I don't want to speak for them, but I do think there's also a desire to kind of strike while the iron's hot in terms of donors, and they've been very patient for a long time as we've tried to put the agreement together, and I think they're wanting to take advantage of that support and move what they can forward in terms of the project. As I said, I do know that there's a couple callers on the line for sure that are prepared to speak to you and address this proposal and possibly answer any questions that you might have. I'd be happy to answer questions as well.
Okay, questions for staff?
I've got a few. Commissioner Hodges here. I'm looking through the original resolution that we passed, and under section 3B, there are several documents that are identified that need to be negotiated and agreed upon and voted on by the governing body. And I guess my question is, are we going to go ahead and work through all of these? Because one that I saw that could generate some discussion, at least from my point of view, would be the administration of naming rights. In that in the blue sheet, it does say that Baseball Enterprises has been asked to retain the naming rights for East Crawford Recreation Area. And I applaud them for wanting to move forward and kind of push this project to get started. But I think that there are some questions and some expectations that we need to be really clear about before we move to the next step. So is that something that we'll be taking a look at, is getting these details hammered out prior to them moving forward with Dean Evans?
Yes, definitely. I thought you were going to say prior to the agreement coming back to you. I haven't gone through.
And both.
Right.
Both, yeah.
I haven't gone through the prior agreement in detail just yet. If there's direction from the City Commission, I would expect that we're going to sit down and parse out, okay, that's going to be our starting point, and how much of this needs to be retained to move this aspect of the project forward, and how much of it may need to be taken up at a later date. But naming rights in particular, they've indicated an interest. I've had some conversations, and I really would like to defer to them in terms of kind of what they're thinking in terms of naming rights. I don't want to misspeak on their behalf, but I think they're trying to be respectful of Dean Evans and the Dean Evans name, and still try to keep some options open in terms of naming rights. So they might be able to elaborate a little bit more on what they're thinking there.
Right, and this may, Commissioner Hodges, this question may be more for Baseball Enterprises as opposed to staff, but has there been contemplation of the fact that we're going to have to pass 2 charter ordinances? And so there's at least a possibility that this may be a freestanding project on its own. Has that been acknowledged? Are they willing to work forward from that with that assumption, if that scenario were to come out?
Just so I'm clear, I think, and again, I'll defer to them,
Right.
but the conversations that we've had are the Dean Evans project, recognizing no transient guest tax, which
Right.
would be the basis of the charter ordinances. So I think there's
This
a
is
willingness on their...
standalone.
I'm sorry?
This would be a standalone.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
I think there's recognition and a willingness that this is fully funded by them, standalone project. There needs to be an agreement with the city in terms of
Absolutely.
the project, the scope, the naming rights, how to proceed. But their desire is to do what they can with the funds that they have. Well, I don't know in total what they have in funds, but they want to use their funds to focus on the Dean Evans improvement.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Franz here. I'm actually supportive of this approach because one of my thoughts about the original project is pretty clear that Dean Evans is the facility that, at least my impression from what I've heard, has the greatest need in terms of drainage issues, in terms of field playability when the conditions are a little bit adverse. And I like the approach, or kind of a phased approach, where we would have done perhaps that and maybe one other field just to see how this turfing project would go. Give us a chance to assess the contractors, to assess the vendors, to see exactly what's involved in moving forward with this. So I actually like this approach. I still have a concern about this project in general of the replacement cost. And on this portion of the project, that's going to work out to somewhere in the order of $50,000 to $60,000 a year that we are committing to, based on a 10-year replacement cycle, which is my understanding of what the typical expected replacement cycle is. And I think we need to plan for that, to have some way of setting that money aside, plan for that replacement when it becomes necessary. And there's a final thing that maybe it's not entirely logical, but it just bothers me that we talk about a plastic bag ban at a time that we're going to buy, I don't know, thousands of pounds of plastic that we're going to throw away in 10 years. That strikes, there's something that's not consistent about that. But I get why we want it. I know that, it's very difficult to offer these facilities in a reliable way for tournaments and such. I was, it was a year ago, probably a little more than a year ago, I was sitting in a restaurant at the south end of Salina, and there was I will describe it as a family, but there was a middle-aged gentleman, middle-aged woman, and they had 4 boys who were probably 13 to 14 years old, and I got the distinct impression that 1 or 2 of the boys might be theirs, and the other 2 were just along. They were in baseball uniforms. Well, gentleman was on the phone, and he hangs up, and he's got this kind of disgusted look on his face, and he says, well, they canceled it because of the condition of the fields. So I've witnessed firsthand the kind of thing that can happen when we have a field that we just can't get ready for a scheduled tournament. And, I don't know if they were planning on playing at Dean Evans or somewhere else, but the point is that I see that as a very real need, despite some concerns about plastic and replacement costs. I would suggest that we be very careful in any agreement we do, that we don't necessarily commit to the remainder of the project, because we don't have money for that yet. We haven't done the transient guest tax things. We don't know how that might fly in the community. So there remains a lot to be done before we can commit to the balance of the project.
Mike Scragg here. I apologize if anything I said contributed to confusion, because there's no expectation of us committing to future phases of the project. There's hope on their part that the economy will recover and the transient guest tax will become an option again, but I don't think there's any expectation that the agreement would have any provision in that regard.
Okay, do we have anyone online that would like to make a comment?
I believe we do. We've got a couple representatives of Salina Baseball Enterprises. I'll remind those of you that I'm going to unmute, if you could be sure to turn down the sound in the background so that you're just listening to the call and not on speakerphone, but with it off of speakerphone. That's our best bet to avoid feedback. So I believe this is Kenny Hancock. I'm going to unmute you now, Kenny.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kenny Hancock here, representing Salina Baseball today. I'm here to answer some questions and maybe go over some of the things that Mike already put in your packet. My colleague, Byron Tomlins, I believe, is on the line as well. He's probably going to jump in and offer his comments as well once I'm done. And Mayor Scragg is right. We're asking for permission to do turf Dean Evans only and do some other upgrades to Dean Evans only at this time. While we don't have any expectation that you are committing at this time to doing the major project, we are hoping that all the effort that we've all put together for the last 2+ years now is that once the transient guest tax returns to pre-COVID levels, they'll at least take a hard look at that, and hopefully we can move forward with that. But we certainly don't expect anything from the city until those transient guest tax return to what might be considered levels that can support the project. Our current proposal is just for the Dean, as I already said, and it is solely at our expense. We're concerned about losing yet another construction season. Losing Quarry State, if we don't do something, is almost a certainty, certainly a reality. We'd like the city of Salina to be able to retain its image as a baseball, softball center, and of course, Dean Evans Stadium has been the centerpiece of baseball in Salina for many decades. Last weekend, Salina Baseball Enterprises had its annual American Legion team tryout, and in order to do that, we had to get 50 volunteers to get those fields ready. The fields weren't even playable enough to the point where we could hold tryouts. And that's just another testament to how bad the situation has got. And I understand that the city might be short-staffed at this point. But for us just to hold a tryout, we had to have 50 volunteers working long, hard hours to get the field in any kind of a playable shape. I'll open that up. I understand Commissioner France's concerns about turf. I'm a traditional baseball guy myself, and if I could play on baseball, or play baseball on turf and on grass rather, infield and outfield, that's what I prefer. But as you stated, it's really not practical when you're trying to have long tournaments with many games and you get weather delays. And the competition around the state is going to start taking away more and more business from us as a recreation center, and the merchants in town are going to simply, they're already suffering from the results of this coronavirus, and I'd hate to see them lose more and more business due to us not doing something. We're passionate about being able to do something this year, and in the next couple of years, if we can continue the project, that's great. We're still going to be around. As far as the naming rights that Commissioner Hodges brought up, I think I'm going to let my friend Byron talk to that directly, but we are asking for retaining some of the naming rights but it's really not all of the fields at this point because we're only doing Dean Evans. But I'm going to open it up to questions if you have that I could possibly answer.
Mr. Hancock, Mayor Hoppick here. Has the drainage situation, has that project been completed?
You know, I'm going to let Manager Schrag answer that, but I'm out exercising and riding my bike around, and I've stopped multiple times, and it appears that the drainage system has been corrected, and indeed, I believe it's actually working. And I'll ask Mayor, City Manager Schrag to jump in here, but I believe it is done, and it seems to be working.
Yes, I haven't personally observed it, but the feedback I've gotten from the Parks Department and the Parks Director is the work was completed. Well, I should say I went out there on one occasion, and there are kind of weep holes in the back wall behind home plate that I've been told had water drain out of them in the heat of the summer, and in some of our rain events, they were dry. They didn't have water coming out of them anymore. The Parks Director also indicated there's a surprisingly significant amount of flow coming out of the pipe that we've installed in the diversion, but he also noted that's addressing home plate and first base, but it's not addressing the third base side. And the third base side is water coming off of the former runway on the north side of Dean Evans, and so the under drain system associated with the turf would allow for capturing that, connecting it, and discharging that, and would be the way to dry up the third base side. Now, the one other thing that I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Mr. Hancock, but in terms of replacement cost, that under drain system and some of that, it doesn't necessarily need to be replaced in the out years. It would just be the turf that's either the turf in its entirety or the worn out portions of the turf, correct?
That's correct. The under drain system, once installed, unless it's installed incorrectly, of course, it remains permanent and you don't replace it. You just replace the worn out areas of turf.
Mayor Hoppick here. Mr. Hancock, approximately if turf's installed, what type of staffing time will it take to keep that up or address that on a weekly basis? Is there any?
There's always going to be some, right? But there won't be any watering. There won't be any mowing. The water bills obviously will go down. There's no chalking whatsoever. There will be the occasional grooming of the fields, and there'll be a groomer located at Dean Evans. And it takes, anywhere from an hour to 2 or 3 hours, I suppose, a week if you wanted to do it, depending on how often you do it. We get differing opinions from different user groups of these turf fields. Some people don't groom them as often as others, and I think it's whatever level of pride and we want to take into it. Our original vision was that whatever user group, whether it be one of the high schools or Kansas Wesleyan or our Legion program, we would have designated people that know how to do the grooming, especially around the areas like the pitcher's mound, first and second base, and home plate, and that we would do that after every use. But a full groom of the outfield and all the infield that very seldom gets walked on anyway, probably on a very infrequent basis.
Travis Shaley with the Parks Department's here, and we've had conversations about what's involved with the grooming, and it may depend on the product, but I call it crumb rubber, but there's rubber pellets in the turf that provide padding that get tracked around and have to be groomed back into place. But Travis, do you have anything you want to share?
I don't have a lot of experience with the turf. Obviously, we don't have any.
Leading rights for the whole facility or just one field? I think that the proposed project is excellent, low risk for the city. We get the ball rolling, so to speak, for getting the sport started. But the two concerns I have are, one, to what extent we can extend the naming rights without the whole project being considered, and the second, if this proposal would include starting an escrow fund for turf replacement, or would that be expected to come when the city completes the larger project agreement?
So, Commissioner Davis, Mike Scragg here. I think Mr. Hancock deferred to our next caller to discuss the naming rights but he may be best able to speak to kind of an escrow fund or a replacement approach for the turf.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hancock again.
You know, the replacement fund, we assumed would be part of the agreement that, we actually started we're very close to completing, as Mr. Schrag said earlier. We assumed that would be a part of this, hopefully much shorter agreement for giving us permission to do the Dean Evans on our own. Definitely, we would look at some sort of a sinking fund that we would start putting money into right away. If we were fortunate to, I'm going to let Byron talk to this in greater detail, because we have to go back to our private donors and ask them exactly what is their current interest level, considering it won't be an $8 million project right away. But if we have extra funds available to us, and we're very confident we will, but we would expect to put that in some sort of a fund. And of course, we're going to be around for the next few decades we plan on. So we would expect that a sinking fund be established right away.
Right. Thank you.
Commissioner Hodges here, if I could just follow up on that really quickly. Commissioner France had kind of given an estimate of about $50,000 a year that we would need to be investing in a sinking fund, and I guess that's probably because the replacement turf would cost about half of the initial turf installation, and then spreading that out over 10 years. Is that a figure that you all are comfortable with?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that, in that we are not necessarily committing to being the people that replace the entire turf on our own. I think at some point that's going to be another shared cost from all the user groups. I can tell you that the user groups do expect there to be some ongoing costs to do that, and to that extent, we believe we'll be a part of that solution. I will also confirm that the numbers that Commissioner Franz put out is about the same numbers that I have, so I think we're looking at it in the same way.
Thank you. And Commissioner Hodges here again. And I guess I would just like to say that even though it may seem premature to be looking at that, I think that these are precisely the conversations that it's important for us to work through right now, so that we all come out of this feeling like we got exactly what we thought we were going to get when we were going in. So I understand your frustration, and as well as your enthusiasm for getting this project off the ground. But these are some of the details that I would like to have reflected in the agreement, just so that we're all on the same page and we all know what's expected of us.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Is there any other questions that I can answer, or shall we turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Tomlin?
Mayor Hoppinger, let's see what Mr. Tomlins has to say.
Okay, Mr. Tomlins, you are unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Byron Tomlins, Salina Baseball Enterprises board member. Certainly, I've been listening in and have no disagreement with anything heard. I hope to clarify a couple questions on the naming rights. The original project, as you have mentioned, indicated that we would seek several naming rights because we did have multiple remodeling of diamonds. With this current request, I can tell you there is only one naming request, and that would be for the East Crawford Recreational Facility. That would be the only naming right that we would seek to help us in our fundraising for this project as it exists now, since the original project has been, we are under the impression, at least, that the city cannot do that $8 million project with us. We understand. So this is our plan B, so to speak, and option one of this plan is what we are interested in knowing, so I can go back to my donors, and I pretty much have to refund all of their original quests, tell them the new project, understand that you're accepting or in favor of this project, so we can go and see how much of our funds retain, how much we change, and go forward and commit to finishing the $1.8 million for Dean Evans.
This is Mike Scragg, and I'm going to try to word this question so it's not confusing. Recognizing your proposed approach is Dean Evans only, and the naming rights associated with East Crawford, and assuming we're beyond that and we're into another phase of other improvements at East Crawford, at that point, do you see naming rights associated with other fields and other locations and facilities at East Crawford?
The only, yes, that is possible. That is possible, yes.
Mayor Hoppick here. So I think that you cleared this up and make sure I understand this. So Dean Evans Stadium would still be Dean Evans Stadium, but you want the ability to call the East Crawford Recreation, what is it, ECRA? You'd be able to call it the Byron Tomlin's Sports Complex.
The only, and we initially, in our contract, had talked with staff about the sensitivity of corporations and what they represent. The only candidates that we would even consider on this naming facility would be prominent personal families of Salina individuals. We would not get into the corporate world for the naming, just to let the commissioners know some extra information. We're very sensitive on the policy. We've studied the policy. We've followed the steps so far of filing, and I can tell them that, again, on this project, you are correct. It is only one that we would even seek, and we're not 100% sure we would even require that if we don't achieve it. We still think we can do the project. We're just asking for the possibility to have that
one,
to aid our fundraising.
Mayor Hoppick, so you want that one naming right for the
Dean Evans Stadium would never change under any project from our that we're involved in. Never.
Commissioner Davis, just for staff and my clarity, even if we agree to the naming possibilities in this agreement, do we still have to run the entire naming rights procedures that we've done for other locations in town, separate from the baseball agreement itself?
Mike Scragg here. Yes, I believe that's like a 5-step process, and as Mr. Tomlins mentioned, they've addressed a couple of the steps, but they'd have to finish out the rest.
Our understanding is of that, and we're aware of that.
Okay, that clears that up a little bit. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Tomlins?
Byron, this is Mike Scragg again. Anything you wish to elaborate on in terms of turf replacement and sinking fund and that conversation?
Well, we understand that the turf replacement, usually from all of our studies and talking with the turf companies, is a 10 to 15-year window. And with the play on it, one of the big advantages, and I agree with Kenny, I think a lot of us baseball purists, so to speak, would love to have grass infield and grass outfield. But with the amount of play that Dean Evans gets and a lot of these other diamonds that are busy day after day in the spring and summer, I think that the turf, from a maintenance standpoint, even with replacement costs, we will still be way ahead for now and for the future, because the wear and tear on grass, the wear and tear of having to chalk water, fight the weather elements. That is making our stadiums decline in the quality of surface. And so other cities that have adopted turf are only moving in the direction of putting more in. And that tells me in studying them, using them as kind of as a testing ground, none of them have opted to go back to regular turf. And just with as much play as our diamonds get, I feel it's the best thing for the community. That would be my, and as far as a sinking fund, of course, all of the committees and things that we were talking about initially, we felt were vital because of the multiple diamonds we were putting in. But I agree with the commissioner's comment, since we're putting in one diamond, certainly we would be glad to do what we can to help. But with one diamond, that certainly allows everyone a little test ground to see. And I think while the replacement is always important, it certainly should be manageable by the city and the users when we know we have 10 to 15 years to plan for it. So that's really, anything I had to comment, and I would be most happy to answer any other questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tomlins. Do we have any other callers on the line, Mike?
If there's any other caller that wishes to speak on this topic, please press star 9. There are a handful of callers I don't recognize, so I'll give it a little bit more time. If any of the callers wish to speak on this topic, please press star 9. As soon as I say I don't see any, you'll start talking and then there'll be one, but I don't see any at the moment.
Okay, with that, I'll bring it back up to the commission for further discussion or for action.
Commissioner Ryan here. I presume that the turf is a less expensive type of field to maintain over the course of a season.
Your seasonal maintenance is less.
You're not mowing, and can anybody put a number on that for me?
Watering, chalking, all those daily things that we do to get the field ready. You do not have to perform the probably weekly or monthly, getting the surface back to level. My understanding, with their original proposal, there's a machine included with that to perform such duties, to do some maintenance, because there is some maintenance, but not compared to regular turf.
Yeah, and I guess I would add, this is Mike Scragg. Staff's had some conversations about that may not necessarily mean a lesser staffing level. It may mean that we're focused on picking up trash and cleaning the bathrooms, things that we struggle with right now. But there is an efficiency there. It may allow us to redirect staff time to tasks we've not been able to keep up with.
My thought is that if there's efficiency there to capture, that might be contributed to the long-term fund for the replacement of the turf.
Right, well, and that's why I bring it up. If we capture that efficiency by not having the staffing, then we could redirect that cost. If we say, we've never been able to keep up with bathrooms, trash, and other maintenance items, that's a gain for the city, and it's a staffing gain and a financial gain, but it's not revenue that we could redirect.
It's not a hard cost.
Right.
Yeah. And Commissioner Franz, I'd just like to say that the savings in water is a little bit problematic, because we might save what we pay in the water bill for the baseball fields, but the water department gives up a corresponding amount of revenue. So from the citywide perspective, that's a wash.
Commissioner Hodges, I appreciate you using the term wash when we're talking about water.
Thank you. I was
You're
thinking
welcome.
about that.
I listen for the puns. I do.
I wonder if anybody would catch that.
Yeah, I had to go ahead and, yeah. Commissioner Hodges, considering, all that we've heard, not just today, but over the course of many meetings before, if we can get some degree of, concurrence on our replacement approach, on, the naming rights, on these other agreements that are specified in the original agreement that we adopted, unfortunately, I think that we're just going to have to work through some of that in order even to pursue just a portion of it, because these are conversations that are going to affect the whole project. So with that said, I'm comfortable moving forward as long as we have an agreement that spells out everyone's expectations and leaves as little room for interpretation as possible.
Mike Scragg, I agree. I'm not whining, I guess, but as staff, when we're trying to meet with them and anticipate what it is that will satisfy the city commission, that's difficult on occasion. So any additional direction you wish to provide as a governing body would be helpful. What I'm hearing, and I'll summarize this and ask you to correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, it sounds like Salina Baseball Enterprises has indicated that in connection with the Dean Evans project only, their financial commitment to the Dean Evans project only, that they would like to have naming rights for East Crawford Recreation Area. And I haven't heard pushback in that regard. So unless you give me direction otherwise, I think we would draft the agreement in that way. All the other naming rights would still be reserved, whether that's field naming, scoreboard naming. I don't even know what all they might have in mind. But East Crawford Recreation Area itself would be on the table. And I think Mr. Tomlins mentioned limiting it to families, and I'd have to go back and look at our policy, but I think it contemplates corporate naming as long as it's not offensive corporate naming. But they've gone the extra step of saying that they want it to be a prominent, supportive family rather than a corporation necessarily. And then with respect to replacement, that admittedly has been a difficult conversation for staff and Salina Baseball Enterprises for quite some time. What I think I heard them say was a willingness to create some type of sinking fund. They didn't talk about a number. I know from our prior conversations and what I heard in their comments today was recognition that users, and some of those users are significant donors, but users would be expected, they would anticipate paying user fees, and some of that being set aside for replacement. If you combine that sinking fund and you combine what we might be able to charge in the way of fees, I honestly don't know if we can get to $50,000 a year or not. I think that's probably a good target. I would tell you, as we talk about tournaments and we talk about users, we quickly, whether it's this, whether it's an event is elsewhere in the park system, we quickly hear about the economic benefit to the community of that event and the need for a fee waiver or a need to work with them so they can bring the event to the community in the first place. So while we have good facilities and we want to bring events to the community, I just know, I'm fully confident we're going to continue to have conversations about what can we do to compete with other communities in terms of fees.
Mayor Hoppick here. I would say when you're talking about the sinking fund that they would give us a number that they would target to raise. I would not expect that organization to raise the entire amount that would be the replacement dollars in my mind. Primarily because of the cost savings we have, plus it is a partnership to replace that, and we are getting a benefit from it from an economic standpoint. And again, we're just dealing with one fund here or one field here, but I can tell you, I know that Mr. Hancock can probably answer this, but Goddard has built a new facility, and again, it caters to younger ages, but there were 60 teams there this weekend in Goddard because they put in turf fields, and there's those type of places. And again, if we're going to compete with those type of places, we're going to have to do something at some point. So, and it does have an economic impact.
I'm just going to say, it is a partnership, but this agreement for us is a relatively low risk, low obligation deal. We're not obligating anything other than the naming rights. And I think we have enough time to work out the turf replacement.
Yeah.
cost, with both groups contributing.
I would agree.
I'm done.
Mike's Craig again. I kind of spoke on behalf of Salina Baseball Enterprises, so I certainly, or speculated at least, I certainly want to give either one of them the opportunity to clarify anything I might have said. So Mr. Hancock or Mr. Tomlins, if you want to clarify at all, please press star 9 and we'll unmute you and get you back into the conversation. Okay, Mr. Tomlins, I've got you unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. There is one other thing that was in our proposal for Dean Evans that I just wanted to make sure that was spoken today, and that is that the American Legion program does currently have scheduling priority in the summer, and our agreement that we were drafting just extends that, and the agreement we were drafting extended it through to the year 2050, and for $1.8 million, that would be, that was a part of our request. I did not mention that previously.
Mayor Hoppick here. Mr. Tomlins, that's been in effect for quite a few years already, hasn't it?
It was in effect the very first year Dean Evans was built and was given to us because of the amount of money that we donated toward Dean Evans, which at that time, Dean Evans Stadium was built for right under $900,000, and we contributed $440,000 of that. And today, and that was for 25 years, and it expires in the year 2021. We would just ask we continue that agreement another 25 years for the $1.8 million going forward.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, any other questions?
Commissioner Hodges, just to include a couple of other things as you staff attempts to work forward with an agreement. It would be good to have some kind of an acknowledgement that this may be considered a standalone project depending upon the recovery of our transient guest tax and or the results of any charter ordinance decisions or elections. We talked about identifying some kind of a sinking fund structure. I would also include that if we cannot satisfy all of the items listed in Section 3B, that we at least address them so that there's an acknowledgement there and at least some sort of intention on how we're going to work through those. Those are the things that I would like to see in an agreement going forward.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Franz, if I hear what you're saying, you see this as a kind of a template for the expanded facilities that are presumably going to be scheduled later.
Yeah, I would, Commissioner Hodges. I mean, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, I understand that this is just a very small component, but I think that we need to work through these issues on the front end rather than, than just going through and saying, okay, let's get going, let's do it, and still have these questions outstanding. So that would be my preference, to get as much of this nailed down on the front end as possible.
You were talking about,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Excuse me, Mayor Hoppick, you were talking about dealing with the charter ordinance?
Well, we're going to, just an acknowledgement that in order to, if we go through with the whole $8 million proposal where we put in the $4 million, we're going to have to amend two charter ordinances.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with this, though. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
This is a standalone. I mean, yeah, granted, if we decide to enter into an agreement with whoever it is to do $4 million, then that's when we have to deal with the charter ordinances. This I don't know why, I guess I'm confused as to why this one would have to deal with the charter ordinances.
Excuse me, just, I think just to kind of, not to necessarily like deal with it, just to include that there's an acknowledgement that in order for us, well, here's what I don't want to happen, and maybe it'd be easier to explain it this way, is what I wouldn't want to happen is if we got into this agreement and the work were completed, and as we move forward, whether that's due to the transient guest tax maybe not recovering as robustly as we had expected, or as the makeup of the commission changes and we're not able to amend a charter ordinance, or there's an election that's forced about amending the charter ordinance and that doesn't come to fruition, just some sort of statement saying that there are factors out there in the future that we can't control at this point to continue on with the full $8 million project.
Mike Scraig here, if I may. I understand your point, and I can't rattle it off the top of my head, but there's legalese that you see pretty frequently that, the agreements and representations are limited to the terms of this agreement, and we may need to go so far as to say, give a little bit in the recitals in terms of where the conversation started and then it veered off, and this is completely limited to the Dean Evans project.
Commissioner Hodges, I think that, yeah, what I'm looking for,
yeah,
Commissioner Hodges, well, I think what I'm looking for is like something in the recitals in terms of we acknowledge that there's, that this is at the present time is its own standalone component. And I think
right.
that's
yeah, I think we can acknowledge that concern without having to flesh out
right.
all the eventualities of the $8 million
yeah, exactly.
project.
I mean, I'm just looking for just an acknowledging statement.
Yeah. Commissioner Franz here, as a part of this agreement moving forward with the Dean Evans portion of the project, we would not repeal Resolution 1977-22. I presume that resolution would stay in effect.
I hadn't given that a lot of thought, but yeah,
well,
it certainly
because that
could.
resolution addresses the transient guest tax, it addresses all of those
right.
issues. So while a recital might be nice, if we don't repeal this existing resolution, that remains in effect, and that remains a part of our commitment or a condition to our commitment moving forward. So I'm not sure it's absolutely necessary. It probably doesn't hurt anything either.
Yeah, given everything that's transpired, any clarity we could add, I think probably
Sure.
would be helpful. But I think we understand the focus of the moment is Dean Evans. We want to make that clear, and the remainder we'll deal with as the pandemic gets resolved and our economy becomes more clear.
Commissioner Franz, are we ready for a motion?
I am.
I would move that we act to indicate concurrence with the proposed approach and authorize staff to coordinate with representatives of Salina Baseball Enterprise to prepare a revised agreement specific to Salina Baseball Enterprises, fully funding the proposed improvements to Dean Evans Stadium.
Commissioner Ryan, second.
Mayor Hoppick here. We have a motion and a second to indicate concurrence with the proposed approach that was brought to us by Salina Baseball Enterprises for Dean Evans Stadium. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, that passes 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Tomlins and Mr. Hancock, for your time. That moves us to 7.5.
Cheryl Murmas, Deputy City Clerk. Item 7.5, update on Fieldhouse Camp.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Travis Shaley here from the Salina Parks and Recreation Superintendent. 2 weeks ago, you gave us some direction to devise a plan to offer the summer Fieldhouse Camp yet this summer. So we quickly got to the drawing board. We met with staff and came up with a tentative plan, and we divided into some categories so it'd be easier for you to follow. Came up with the categories, kind of with the timeline with it. So with that, we'll get started. We started at the top, and that involved full-time staffing, and this would start right away. We did some legwork on this already, but we would need to receive permission to modify the existing work share. We would have to bring a staff member out of furlough, and we would have to hire some part-time staff similar to the golf course. The next one would be Recreation Superintendent, myself, increase from 24-hour work share to 32. Don't worry about that one. That one's already been done with the baseball things we have going on, so I'm plenty busy. But the Recreation Supervisor, I did contact him, who normally oversees this camp, and I contacted him about his summer plans, and he gave a response of announcing his retirement. So, which moves us to Plan B, and we do have another recreation supervisor who is currently on furlough, and that would require her to come in on a 32-hour work share and to oversee the camp. The next we would go to part-time staffing, and again, that would have to begin right away. The current Fieldhouse program director, and his name is on the license, by the way, and he is currently out of state on a family matter for an unknown time. He has indicated that he could possibly come back and help, so that did throw a kink in things, but our senior counselors did indicate that they could help in some capacity, fill that void. We did call the KDHE, and that would be more of a formality, just changing the name on the license. So we think we could expedite that right away. There are currently 6 returning camp counselors available to return out of, I believe we had 14 on our staff last year, and I want to discuss that 6 number. Some of those have indicated they want to return on a part-time basis, not a full-time basis. So we do have 50 hours of operation to cover. If we're open Monday through Friday, starting at 7:30 to 5:30, that's 50 hours of capacity. So in order to avoid overtime, we schedule accordingly. So we try to get staff members close to that 40 hours, but in return, we need more. We need more staff to cover that 50-hour capacity. So we would need to hire and train at least 4 to 6 new counselors, and one of those would have to provide security at the door. Because please keep in mind, the facility would not be open to the public like it normally is, that we would have to have someone at the door, especially in the beginning hours. The campers usually show up at that 7:30 anywhere to 9:30 in the morning, and then anywhere from mid-afternoon to 5:30. So we would have to designate or hire an existing counselor to perform that duty. Staff hiring. We got some good news, and the counselor position remained open on our website. So it remained that people could apply. We have applicants dating clear back to January for this position. So reposting the position would not be necessary. We would have to repost, and that has a 2-week timeline to it. So in this case, we did luck out leaving it on the website. We would review the counselor and other applications right away. This would have to occur this week, and we would have to schedule interviews and conduct them next week, June 8th through the 11th. With this approach, we're kind of uncertain on the availability of the applicants at this time. Again, they've applied clear back from January. We don't know if they're available, what status they are. We do know that there's some available. If we searched out to other applicants, maybe it wasn't a counselor position, but other applicants who maybe applied as a scorekeeper, or we would search those as well. We're uncertain on the quality or the qualifications that we're after as well. Typically, when we do hiring, it takes anywhere from 10 to 14 days to get all the paperwork necessary to get them on board. So a lot of that could be on the applicant themselves. I say, hey, we're ready to go, and they don't turn in the paperwork right away. So we're waiting on them. They have to be responsible to turn in the paperwork right away. There's no room for error in this situation, and to get them, get their paperwork, do background checks, all those necessary things to get them on payroll usually takes 10 to 14 days. Which brings us to staff training. If we were to get everybody on payroll and by the 19th, I believe, then we can perform staff training. Even if we're just training them, they have to be on payroll. So with this particular position and the camp, all staff members must perform 16 hours of training to be certified for this camp. Those things include CPR, first aid, abuse training, and we do incorporate some of our protocol as well, like EAPs, get our equipment together, just a lot transpires in that week. We do also, they are required to do a fingerprint background check through the KDHE, so pretty extensive. But we do have to have them on payroll by that time, and then there's a lot to be performed in that June 22nd through the 26th. I want to also remind that training must be complete in order for the camp to begin. So that's why we do have a tentative start date for the camp as June 29th. We feel that's the soonest we can begin with the parameters that we're given. During such time, there's a lot of things that transpires, ordering supplies, creating the work schedules for the staff. They do daily activity plans, so there's a lot of planning going on during that time. Please keep in mind, we meet as a group in February for this camp. Usually, it's a lot of planning, a lot of staff. So this approach here is streamlined. There's inspections that we do have to do in order to get the facility ready to go. Our advertising, what we would do there is advertise through the radio and through the newspaper. That is an $800 cost to the camp. Of course, we utilize many other free advertising that are very well advantageous as well, and those could be website. Word of mouth is good for this one. We got a lot of people word of mouth. Our email, we do have a good contact list, so we do have some other advertising methods as well. Most activities in this camp are done as a group. I have the privilege of sitting there, having my office there, and watching this camp go in action, and it's action. They're busy. So, but most are done as a group. And then when I met with staff, this is one of the things that they hung up on the most is maintaining social distancing and individualized equipment and participants wearing masks. The only example I could give to you is I had several parents come in the morning, and they thanked us. My kid was tired after camp last year. They went right to bed. Well, they're constantly on the go. They're constantly group activities. So staff did have a high concern of wearing masks during such activities because it requires oxygen. Most of the field trips that we do are affordable and they're popular is Kenwood Cove. As you know, it's closed for the summer, and as far as I'm aware, the library activities have been closed for the summer as well. Those are two big ones. They're affordable and they're popular. So we would have to reach out to some of our other field trips. They're possible, which is bowling, going to the movies, those type of things, but they also do come at a cost. So we reached out to the Salina County Health Department. As far as renewing our license, they do this with inspection. They would, she shows up at a random day, at a random time, and does our inspection. So we would be due for inspection this year at that time, whatever time she chooses. We would make every attempt to follow their guidelines pertaining to social distancing and equipment. But again, offering the type of activities that we do, it's simply not feasible to maintain social distancing. We asked them, what's the protocol when a camper or an instructor tests positive? And they would do an investigation, they would track, and they would implement either a shutdown or a quarantine. And that doesn't just include staff and campers, that includes families or who's ever associated with them as well. Estimated participants. This one I took. We had a list of 91 previous campers, and I made a point to contact them by phone or email. I pounded the phones and pounded the keyboards because I knew this was an important piece to it. Out of the participants responded, 30 of them responded that they would attend the camp in some form or fashion. Some of those did say, yes, I would attend, but it might not be till the end of camp or at the beginning of the camp. Our format is set up to where they could go to week 1, but maybe skip week 2. Hey, we're on vacation or that type of thing. So they do sign up per week, which is actually, we've got a lot of good reviews because of that. But I just wanted to throw that out there at you. 18 indicated that they would not participate, and I'm sorry, Commissioner.
I just have a question. So
Yes.
are those 30 that said they would participate, are they aware of the anticipated start date and of the risks involved if the camp has to be closed? Or
They were. I did not put a date to it, a specific date, but I did mention it would not be till the end of June, because we felt at that time, even though we streamlined everything, the earliest that we could start would be the end of June. And so they did respond, and they recognized that.
Thank you.
Again, 18 responded that they would not participate. This could be due to various reasons of COVID. We already found summer daycare for the summer, or just not interested at this time. Food. That's always a popular subject, right? If you remember right, last year was the first year that we got the USD 305 into the Fieldhouse with their lunch program. It worked really, really well. If you also recall that they contacted us about if we were to offer a summer camp this year, and at that time, I did not have an answer for them because that was still up in the air due to COVID. They did not include the Fieldhouse in the lunch program this year, but they do have the option down at Oakdale. So we could walk to Oakdale this year, and with the social distancing piece and safety, walking definitely would be a concern, and it was a concern to our staff. So we got back to the drawing board a little bit with that, and well, what about bringing sack lunches? Because we used to do that in the olden days, right? This would add a cost to the parent. And it does put us in a little situations of when they forget their lunches. So we started brainstorming a little bit more, and we as Salina Parks and Recreation are not equipped nor licensed to provide food, but we do provide the snacks. Mid-morning, late afternoon, those are pretty popular, so we do provide those. And I think Commissioner Davis had a little bit to do with this. St. John's Missionary School, Church is a licensed, and they can provide the food and drink for free, and they can deliver. So I spoke with Pastor Smith already on this, and so we do have that in our hip pocket if we wish to proceed. Another category was operating equipment and resources. We do have most of the equipment on hand there at the Fieldhouse. We did print the manuals right before COVID hit, so the manuals are sitting there. Probably got some dust on them, but we can dust those off. There would be some COVID-specific purchases we would need to make. And I talked about having an extra security person at the door. Our plan would be to take their temperature as they come into the door, a no-touch thermometer. We would have to purchase one of those. We do have some masks, gloves, sanitizer on hand, but not enough. Not enough. And the availability and the cost of these additional supplies could be an issue, and they would be. Facility preparation. Right when COVID hit, the facility was shut down and it was sanitized. Besides the Fieldhouse flooring project, there has not been anybody in there. That would be complete by the proposed starting date of June 29th. They are finishing up as we speak. The facility would need to be sanitized every night. We did some cleaning after every night in a normal year, but we would have to put some extra time and dollars to the sanitation, and this would take an extra a full-time staff member away from an existing facility such as the police station. The estimated expense for that is $700 a week, which is double more than normal. I just threw this in here. You know, last year's July electric bill was $5,392. This year, there would be no other programs going in, weekly programs going on, or rentals to help absorb that cost. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It would be an expense. And the difference you're between now stagnant and $5,392 is about $4,500 of an expense. Speaking of cost recoveries, last year the cost recovery was 107%. And that was for a 9-week camp with total expenses of $51,826. The estimated expenses for a 5-week camp is $28,504, and then additional COVID expenses, and we kind of had to roughly estimate there of $3,600, and that includes the mask, sanitation, the extra custodial expense. That does not include the HVAC difference. I did not include that. I was trying to compare apples to apples in this particular scenario. And that gives us an estimated expense of $32,104. The estimated revenues, we estimated at 40 campers times $110 per week at 5 weeks, so estimated revenue of $22,000. And that brings us to an estimated cost recovery of 69%. So you see there would be a difference there. Concerns. Again, we met with staff, and the number one concern that they kept mentioning is how do we maintain social distancing during our activities, and it's simply not feasible with the activities that we've done in the past. Campers would be limited to activities. The proposed timeline is very aggressive, and there's no room for error. There is a risk of exposure to staff. I would mention some of our senior staff do have some of those indicators with COVID, and the participants. Facility sanitation. Again, we covered that, taking a full-time staff member away from what they're doing right now and adding some expense and time. The risk of a positive case, this one we discussed in great detail of, you know, we do the work, we get going, we have some financial investment of from now till then, and then if we did have a positive case, of a shutdown, where does that leave the families that have registered for our camp, and the effects of a quarantine, that type of thing. And as mentioned, the probability of recovering all direct costs associated with the camp is unlikely. With that, to end it, I guess, you know, we're recreators, we're programmers. We would love to see this thing go. In this particular instance or program, we got some challenges and some uncertainty ahead of us. So with that, I'll take it back to commission.
Okay, questions for Travis?
Commissioner Davis? These aren't necessarily important in order of importance. I know we're talking about cost recovery, but last year's figures did not include staffing of the field house that were there anyway. It didn't include utilities. So when we say it was recovering 110%, that's probably an overestimate. And just saying that if we focus just on that, I don't know that we're looking truly at apples-to-apples cost. I guess I'd be more concerned about absolute cost rather than the percentage. As far as if you get a positive case, that's probably worst case scenario if the program was forced to shut down. Those families probably are in no different situation than they are right now anyway, because most of their other programming has been shut down for the same reason. But a question I did have, let's say you fully ramped up, week 2, you get 3 cases, where you have no doubt in your mind you really need to shut it down. What's the estimated cost to just get this thing up and running?
Sure.
And is it the city's policy to pay the counselors out for the rest of the year? I'm assuming a lot of these would be high school or college kids for whom this is going to be their summer income. I don't know if you even have a scenario in the past that you could use as a comparison. As far as programming, anything the kids are doing this summer, they're going to have some infringement on the social distancing. I'm not advocating that we ignore that. Don't take it this way. But it may just be we're going to have to get creative with different types of programming and try some things that will be unconventional, but can be pulled off in an air-conditioned building. Third question, what's the electric bill for the field house, let's say in the month of April and May of this year with relatively little use?
Sure. I just got the most recent bill, and please keep in mind with the hardwood floor, there has to be some airflow in some condition with the facility. We shut off refrigerators, freezers, those type of things. But with the things that has to occur there, but it's sitting there stagnant, it was $1,063.
1,000. You said 1,000.
$1,063, correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You bet.
This is Mike Scragg.
The issue of what do you do with the employees if you have to shut down?
Yeah, this is Mike Scragg. I was going to try to tackle that one. I don't know that we have a policy per se, other than the reduction in force and layoff policy that we've reviewed before. I do know the HR directors had some conversation or done some research in terms of part-time employees, and so I think they might be entitled to unemployment. I think we'd have to make a policy decision whether we felt that we owed it to them to keep them on payroll and find some other work for them, or whether we laid them off and they're eligible for unemployment.
A student or an adult may be a little hesitant to sign on if they know, well, you have a job for 8 weeks as long as nobody gets sick. And I just didn't know if the city had a policy in these situations where it's like a contract for summer employment and you get paid no matter what.
Yeah, I don't know that we enter into a formal contract to the extent that that would be a requirement. I think that would be a discretionary decision we'd have to make.
All right.
Mayor Hoppiker. Mayor Hoppiker, you have a start date of June 29th. What do you have for an end date?
I don't have a calendar right. July 25th, that last Friday of July.
So we're basically doing it for 4 weeks.
I counted 5 weeks.
5 weeks.
Yes.
So, okay.
Sorry if I don't have a calendar right in front of me.
I knew school started early in August. So that's what it was. So July 25th.
Correct.
Question also, the facility over there, how many and this is a weird question, toilets and sinks, are there?
8 in the men's, and I believe 12 in the women's.
Sinks and, okay.
Excuse me, toilets.
Toilet. Okay, how many sinks do you have? I guess it's more.
4 on each side.
As far as hand washing, I was just trying to think with the increased hand washing
There is a family restroom as well.
Correct. We do have a family restroom that's right in the middle. You have the men's, women's,
and then one
in the middle.
Okay.
And then the kitchen.
You have a kitchen.
Would have a sink.
Yeah, I'm sure there. So, okay. Other questions from?
No questions.
Coleman?
I don't think so.
We're losing the sound.
Can you hear us now, Commissioner Davis?
That's better.
Okay. I think we just need to be sure to speak up.
Okay.
We need to make sure we don't mumble.
Okay.
Commissioner Franz, you may have gathered from my comments earlier, I'm an advocate for us getting involved in some kind of child care support, and I saw this as elimination of this program concerned me greatly because of that. It's helpful for me to see all of the activity that has to go on to get ready. And obviously, if we can't fire this thing up until the very end of June, and we have a very limited season and limited participation, your projection of revenues is based on 40 campers, which is based on the 30 you said would be coming back, plus 10 additional, and probably a few more additional to allow for, I'm going to be here 1 week and not the next.
Correct. That was a kind of a guesstimate. If they say they're coming back, when it boils down to it, are they actually going to come back? You got to weigh that in a little bit, and then you have to weigh in the new participants and then the consistent participants who sign up. So we feel that's a pretty good guesstimate.
And as I recall, the information on this camp typically would be on the order of 80 or 90 participants.
Towards the end of last summer, we were averaging 75, I believe.
Okay, per day.
Per day. It started in 2018, and we started at that 40 number. In order to break even with direct costs, we need to be at that 60-ish number. And then it just kept growing, and then it did reach to 75 to 80, where we had to hire some new staff members in order to keep that ratio and have the camp covered.
Is there anyone on the phone, Mike, that would like to comment?
There are some callers on the line. If anyone wishes to speak to the commission, please press *9. Again, if anyone wishes to speak, please press *9. I don't see any.
This is Commissioner Franz. What action are we being asked to take?
Provide direction on whether you wish for us to stand up the Camp Salina or not.
Commissioner Ryan here. Well, given the obstacles to ramping up and the concerns about maintaining social distancing, as well as the downside of having an outbreak that shuts the entire thing down, and in my opinion, parents are resilient. I think there's a likelihood that parents have already moved on and found other options. I still don't think we're out of the financial woods. We were very conservative and trying to preserve our resources and our monies. So I can't see backing away from the staff's prior guidance. This looks like a bad business decision to me, and with some real downsides. I just don't see where anybody's going to be happy if there's even one case of the COVID during it. We will have exposed a lot of people to it. That's all. I'm just uncomfortable with, I know it was a 3-2 vote in favor last time. I guess I'm still a no vote if we just vote on this again.
Commissioner Ron, could you speak a little bit louder? The last 2/3 of that didn't come across.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, I still have concerns about the financial aspects, and I think that children's parents have probably moved on, not knowing when and how long this camp will work. So I just strikes me as a bad business decision all the way around that if there's a single case, may shut the entire operation down. So I'm just still uncomfortable with moving forward to do this project. Is that a little better?
Much better. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Commissioner Hodges here. I'm still really struggling with this decision because even though there are a lot of obstacles, and Commissioner Davis, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good deal. Even though there's a lot of hurdles for staff, and I acknowledge that there are a lot of hurdles, I also think about the families that have been impacted by the school closure for the last few months, and thinking for, if we could be providing some programming even for 5 weeks out of the year, even if it's looking like a $15,000 loss at this point, I'm struggling, with a budget in the tens of millions of dollars. The services that we could be providing for, 50, 60 families, even for 5 weeks. So I'm just really struggling with this decision because my inclination is to go ahead and proceed with it.
Commissioner Davis, I would agree with Commissioner Hodges' sentiment. Worst case scenario, about $50,000. On the other hand, there are families out there who've not been contacted because they weren't previous participants. So we may have the youth out there who come to the program, and I think this would be a symbolic effort that we're trying to keep some programming, though it does have to be safe from a health perspective. I think people need to see that there's some hope, and not that life is back to normal, but there are some things that can be done. And Salina may have to write the book on how do you run a summer program allowing for social distancing. We do have partners in the community who stepped up to provide meals. We can probably get donations from organizations or persons for materials that might truly not be budgeted. This city tends to work on the basis of if you need it, there's somebody here who can help you get it. And I think this would be right down what Salina does best. I will grant you the ramp-up process does not give you much room for error, but this would be a wonderful thing to pull off. And I would be comfortable, and it sounds like at worst, if we completed the 5 or 6 weeks, we're probably looking at taking a $25,000 to $30,000 hit, but it might be worth a whole lot more to that than that to the families that we help and just to the citizens at large. I'm done. I know you can't see my face, but I'm done.
Mayor Hoppick here. I've watched Camp SWAT quite a bit when I was there. I'm not as familiar with this, but I know a lot of times, the programming aspect increases your attendance as to what you're able to do. And when I look at maybe we're not able to do Kenwood Cove and we're not able to do some other things we've done, I could see attendance being down. I understand what Commissioner Davis said about, writing the book on a safe summer program, and I think that'd be great if we were in February. We had time to put together a manual and some different things in place to help self-distance and for those individuals attending. I don't think we have that. I think we're in a place where we're getting things in place as fast as we can and maybe not have a chance to do that. I'm still a little bit taken back that we've had commissioners that were concerned about doing baseball and softball in the outdoors and how we were going to social distance when we had acres of room, but we're going to put 40 to 50 kids in one building. There's no way we social distance that age group. That's a concern I have. I know they're in daycares now, but a lot of those daycares are 3 to 4 people, not 40 to 50. I think that increases your opportunity to have a case potentially, even though we've only had 29 in the county at this point. So I still think it's a great program. I wish we would have been addressing this in February. I think it's too short a term to make it effective. So for that reason, I'm probably still, my vote's probably the same as last time. So.
Mr. Davis, again, I appreciate the baseball analogy, but we still have not, at least I've not seen on paper the definitive rule for what you do in the dugout. And these are going to be sweaty kids, snotty nose, putting their hands everywhere, touching each other. I mean, baseball still has a big question it's got to answer how they're going to handle that degree of association. Hard projects don't scare me. I mean, anybody can come up with something if you give them enough time. Great organizations can think on the fly. I mean, just the way we're meeting now. The things we've set up on short notice, I think, testifies to our ability. So I'm not afraid of the degree of difficulty. Of course, I'm not the one who's going to have to Monday morning sit down and try to figure out how to do it. But that's why we have the department heads and administrators, because they're smarter than us doing these things. But it's just a question of risk tolerance. I think this is one, for some reason, I'm comfortable with the risk. But I understand, I could argue the other side just as easily. It's just, this is one probably where my gut in my right brain is overruling my logic in the left brain. I'll stop there.
I guess I would accept a motion from the commission if somebody, we're wide open.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I mean, I've been pretty much silent because essentially I don't know quite what to do. This is Commissioner Franz, by the way. I voted to continue the program last time, and Commissioner Davis, I think, makes what are for me some persuasive arguments in the sense that I think this is somewhat symbolic. I would feel a lot more comfortable voting not to do this program if we hadn't have done baseball. And I realize there's an argument going back and forth about which program provides more risk of transmission. To be honest, I read the other day that there are 2 active cases in Saline County right now, and if that stays the case, there's probably minimal risk in either activity. But we don't know what's going to happen in the next 30 days with the relaxation of the stay-at-home order, and there are a lot more people out and around and a lot more people having regular contact. And in 3 weeks, there might be a very different circumstance. There are some differences between the program. This program is going to be, by and large, Salina, Saline County residents. The baseball programs, at least in some cases, go out to other communities, and there are exposures there that are different than they are here. On the other hand, I am troubled by the fact that we're now looking at a 4 or 5 week program. I think that is very limited in scope for the amount of investment that has to go into it. Despite the fact that we've talked to people and we think there might be 30 people returning, as Mr. Shealy pointed out, we really don't know that's the case. I suspect that many families have already made alternative arrangements, and we may end up with 20 or 30 participants instead of 40 or 50. You know, I think on balance, I think I'm going to switch. I'm going to say I probably don't think that, all things considered, it's a wise investment to proceed. I hate to do that, you know, and I'm not going to feel good about it, to be honest with you, either way.
Okay, do we have a motion on the floor? Would somebody like to?
I only have one screen in front of me, and I had to travel with very light pockets. I don't have the papers. I can't switch back and forth to the documents, but I would like to move that we direct staff to undertake setting up Camp Salina for the summer of 2021. The wording may have to be different. I mean, 2020, sorry. Looking very far ahead.
Second.
Okay, Mayor Hoppick here. We have a motion and a second to proceed with Camp Salina for the year 2020. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay. That is defeated 2-3. And to follow Commissioner Francis, it's not a decision I want to make. I think it's the one I had to make at this point, and I hope that we can put this camp back together for next year, and it'll be as stronger than ever. So thanks, staff, for their time.
Like I said, I could vote either way, but you know, if we have 5-0 votes for 6 months where we're doing something wrong, I appreciate the discussion and the expression of feelings on both sides.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioners, Mike Scragg, just as a clarification, that was a vote for something that failed. The prior recommendation was that we not proceed with Camp Salina. So we're going to interpret that as not needing to go through the whole exercise of making a motion to the opposite of that.
That was a motion to not continue with camp.
So the prior direction remains, which was not to conduct the camp this year.
Okay, that leads us to 7.6. Thank you.
Cheryl Murmas, Deputy City Clerk. Item 7.6, April 2020 financial update.
Okay. Turn it over to Ms. Pack.
Good afternoon again. Debbie Pack, Director of Finance and Administration. I started with the good side. Now I'm starting with, this isn't so bad, but it's not as good. We've been trying to keep you updated as we get information on the financials just because of the uncertainty that we know has become our world in the budget world. So we do have the April numbers available. We did provide this on the website a week or so ago, but we did want to bring it to the public so that you could ask any questions or anything that you might have had for us. The first slide is a standard slide that we have been providing, which is the April year-to-date actual transactions compared to last year. This is also compared to the budget that we provided, our original budget. It's compared to our revised budget that we have implemented the savings that we've brought forward to you in the last 8 weeks. And it also provides us with the revised projections for our 30, 60, and 90-day stay-at-home orders. As you can see by this, some of the numbers have changed drastically, and one thing I will mention is that as we went through the process in March, we made the decision that we should make the revenue transfers to the general fund so that we knew where we were now, and that kind of left us where we were going to be throughout the year. So that's a big number that we've done in this process that did increase franchise fees, which is the water and wastewater fee, which was about $1.4 million. And it also increased revenue in general by about $4.3 million based on transfers from other funds into this fund. I did have some questions about kind of what those were, so I wanted to kind of touch on those real briefly. Most of those come from our enterprise funds. Let's see if I can find my data. All of the enterprise funds, sanitation, solid waste, water, and wastewater, are charged with overhead fees for the coverage of payroll, HR, those types of things. It's a calculated number based on information of overhead. They all have a pilot, which is a payment in lieu of tax fee. They have computer technology fees. They either have a franchise fee, which is the one I mentioned to you, or something similar like a host fee for the solid waste. Trying to think of the other ones that
So this, Mayor Hoppick here, that's the interfund transfer number we're looking at, that 4.3 million?
Yes.
When would that have usually been posted?
Typically, we don't make that until the end of the year.
Okay.
And the reason is typically what we do on the revenue side, there's usually no question. We're going to make that transfer to the general fund, no problem. We do have interfund transfers out of the general fund to other funds to support those. And typically what we do in that case is we wait till the end of the year to see really how much. We've budgeted a certain amount, but in some cases we find that we don't need to transfer that entire amount because they don't need it. Those funds don't need it. So typically that would have been in December. We would have done all that as a December entry.
Mayor Hoppick here, is that a hard number or is that an estimate?
It's a hard number. We budget a specific amount.
4.3, okay.
Yes.
So we know we're going to get that transfer, okay.
Yep.
It was such a large number that I was wanting to make sure that we knew that was a good number, and then I was curious as to when that would have come in other than right now. So
the only reason it would change is if the funds that those transfers came out of had a serious failure in some way, but the three funds that those come out of, which is, like I said, solid waste, sanitation, and water and wastewater, those funds have significant fund balances, so I don't see that as a...
Mayor Hoppick here, and that franchise fee up above, that $1.7 million, you said $1.4 million that makes up, because it looks like it was a kind of a steady fund around that $400,000, so that's a one-time transfer too, and we feel like that's a good number also.
Yes.
Correct, okay.
Yes.
And Mike Scragg here, if I may. You may recall that as we were talking about this previously, we talked about making these transfers now, and as you look at some of those scenario projections, that allows us to kind of cash flow through the rest of the year, and we talked about, how much time does that buy us to continue to monitor our performance and adjust?
Mayor Hoppick, I like that. I mean, at least we see, because I'm not panicking in August instead, at least if we're continuing to have a decrease in income versus expenses, at least we kind of see it, and instead of, so yeah, I appreciate that. I think it gives us a...
Right. Debbie Pack, and that's what we're showing on slide 3, is by doing these transfers in April, it kind of gives us a picture of when we are really going to, it gives us a timeline, kind of like Mr. Scragg said, it kind of gives us a period of time that we can kind of just wait for the numbers, we know we're okay, because in all of these scenarios, we don't go to the negative until December if we've done these transfers up front. So that kind of gives us an opportunity to kind of look where the numbers are going and see where we might need to adjust, or if we need to adjust later. So page 3 is the month-by-month kind of cash flow of what we're projecting for the end of the year. The first one is the 30-day. There's a 60-day and a 90-day stay-at-home projections. And people might ask us, well, why are you still looking at these numbers? Because we know we had a 30-day stay-at-home. Well, we don't know that that's all that's going to happen, and that's the bottom line. We don't know if something else is going to happen. So we are going to continue to track these just like we have from 3 or 4 weeks ago, so that we can continue to monitor that and see if there's any changes that we need to make going forward.
Mayor Hoppick here, I had one more question on the April number. The fees and charges, license and permits, I notice we've been running at 90, 70,000. We dropped to 10, and then we jumped back up to the 50 and 60,000 range. What caused that to drop in April?
Are you looking at fees or licenses and permits?
I guess it is fees and charges. I'm sorry. I have it highlighted here. I just can't look to the left or right.
Fees are a category that cover a lot of things. Anywhere from street cuts, which is one of the major numbers in there.
What was that?
Street cuts, so that when somebody does construction and we charge them a fee for having to repair our streets or whatever. What also is in there is all of these Parks and Rec numbers these fees, we've reduced those basically in our projections. The programs that we know that we're not having, we've projected those at zero. So we're trying to, as we make decisions about some of these programs, we're trying to reflect that in these numbers. So the biggest numbers in that category are street cuts, all the animal service numbers, so any of the animal shelter numbers that we have are in that category. The cemetery, those numbers are in that category. So whether those might be reflections of, in April, we were not open to the public, so that could be a lot of that
Commissioner Franz, would that also include building permits and inspection fees and that kind of thing?
Building permits would be in licenses and permits as opposed to fees.
Okay. Inspection fees?
Yes, that would be in the...
Fees and charges? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'll have to look. There's so many.
Okay. Well, it just concerned me that it dropped, but then we went back up, and I was kind of thinking of the Parks and Rec, the fees we've reduced. Well, at this point, we won't have fees for Parks and Rec in May, June, July, August either, because we've kind of cut those programs. So.
Mike Scraig here. We inventoried all those fees, and when we talk about Parks and Rec fees, Kenwood Co., each one of those individual programs, and went through them and zeroed out the bulk of the Park and Rec fees and left some of them pretty much at 100%. We tried to estimate every individual line item, so I feel fairly confident that the numbers that we're projecting monthly to year end are based on that review. I don't know that I can speak to why April went to 10,000.
Yeah, Commissioner Franz, it's just kind of unusual that it dropped to 10,000 and then it jumps back up in May, and you would think that if it was it almost has to be something that is related to the shutdown in April, that there were things that simply didn't come in, and we're expecting them to come right back to, well, no, not back to normal, to about half of normal in the following month.
I would say, too, this is Debbie Pack, that we did have to issue refunds. When we canceled programs, we had refunds that we had to issue for some of that programming, so that may have had an effect on why that number's kind of flipping like that.
That's a really good point.
I hadn't thought of that, because I knew at the golf course, we talked about memberships that we would have had to refund, but that's that's in a
Kenwood
different.
Cove as an example.
So prepays on Kenwood Cove, I know we probably had some of those.
That's
that we
true.
had to,
That's a good point.
We would have had to refund.
Okay.
And Mike Scraig here, if I can jump back to the 30, 60, 90-day discussion just a little bit more. Ms. Pack's correct. We went at this looking at a 30, 60, or 90-day stay-at-home order, and at the time we talked about that may not be continuous days. It may be part in March and then more in the fall. As we've learned more, I think there's a whole nother scenario that may not be attributable to days per se, but lingering unemployment and changes in discretionary spending and changes in social distancing habits, that type of thing. What I would tell you is, our initial estimates for sales tax had us in the 90-day scenario down about 21%. And then, 30 days later, the National League of Cities started opining about the impacts on cities, and they came in at about 21%. So I don't claim to have done that exactly right, but we ended up in the same ballpark as the National League of Cities in their estimates. So we're kind of hanging on to that 90-day worst case scenario as the premise. And as you see, as we'll go through some of these numbers, what little data we have, we still seem to be in the right order of magnitude, it seems like, at the moment.
Commissioner Franz, I would comment that it appears that sales tax year-to-date through April is up about 5%.
Yeah, it was trending well.
We'll get to that, but overall, it's up about 1% to date through April. However, it is down from April from the prior year, about 10%.
I'm talking about compared to prior year through April, it's up about 5%.
It is up, yes.
Which is actually quite good, but that only covers sales through February.
Correct.
Roughly, okay.
Correct.
Commissioner Hodges here, and I guess I wanted to just clarify what I downloaded. The sales tax distribution from May is not included in these numbers, or is it included?
It is not included in the financial numbers at the
Right.
beginning, but we will get farther in the back of the slides, and we did have the data
Yeah.
for sales tax, so we did provide that for you, and we can look at where those numbers have gone. Now, remember, we're still not into the stay-at-home, even with the May numbers, because we didn't start our stay-at-home until March 30th.
And that's what, Commissioner Hodges, that's what bothered me when because I went back and looked to see when Governor Kelly issued her stay-at-home orders, and that wasn't until like March 30th.
Right.
And I'm a little concerned when I'm seeing that our receipts in May are already down 10%, and we really hadn't even advanced into.
We did have 2 weeks of limited gatherings, so that could have had some effect on that. So we do know that was going on. But yes, those are the numbers that we're having to deal with right now. So we will look at that May number, though.
Mike's Craig here, if I can jump in a little bit. We're able to close out April in its entirety, so that's how we're able to do the April numbers. And then recognizing we don't want to wait till we close out May to talk about the sales tax receipts, we've put that in the presentation as well. With respect to March, we spent a lot of time talking about, do we have any portion of March that's representative of what April might be? And unfortunately, I'm not sure that we do. As Ms. Pack said, we've got some mass gathering limitations, but the stay-at-home order didn't really kick in till the end of the month. So April's numbers, we won't know till the end of this month, and those are definitely of major interest.
And when we look at these numbers a little bit more in detail, you'll see that it's very obvious that those social gathering numbers were down because the restaurants have gone down and things like that, but then we'll have numbers with grocery stores and things like that are going up in what we expected in our projections too. So we go through the 30, 60, and 90-day stay-at-home projections month by month. Those are our cash flows. And then what's interesting to us and what we'd like to also show is on slide number 6 is we did a specific projection for April, and how did we do compared to what we actually projected. As we all know, we weren't very far into this thing in April, so most of our numbers were based on nothing. We have no idea what we're looking at. So we'll just admit to that at this point.
That was a little blunt,
but in looking at our numbers, we weren't horribly off. For example, in the year-to-date for April, we had estimated that in our 30-day projection that we'd be at $20,850,000 in revenue. We came in at $20,600,000, so we were down about $228,000 in our projections for April. Now, you'll note that the 30, 60, 90-day projections are the same. At April, we didn't anticipate that this would be affecting those numbers. So the numbers for all three of those situations will be the same. But what we did see is in expenditures, we had projected a little over $12 million, and we came in at about $11.7 million. So we were under our projection of expenditures by about $493,000, which left us to the good of about $260,000, comparing April to our April projection in all three 30, 60, 90 scenarios.
And again, if I could add a little bit of commentary, remember, we were preparing the estimates in March, so we had the benefit of kind of being able to see what was coming in April more so than when we can see further out into the fiscal year. And then we're hopeful. I commend the department heads, and I'll do it again, for their willingness to take a look at expenditures and make a second and a third pass through expenditures. And so we're seeing positive results currently. As the year goes on, we'll see if we can maintain that reduced level of spending. If we have maintenance items or unforeseen things that come up, that may throw off our anticipated savings on the expenditure side.
So the next set of graphics are just graphics that we've been providing you through the website, and it's just a comparison of where we see the COVID projection to our original 2020 budget. In property tax, we were going along that we were going to be about a 10% delinquency on our projections. That shows in this graphic. I will mention that we did get our property tax numbers. They're not in this scenario because we just got them last week. And Currently, we're at about a 94% collection rate. So what we were projecting to be about a 90% at this point, we're a little higher than that. That's typical for this time of the year. We understood that that's probably what was going to happen because most of those would be escrowed. We do anticipate that we will have one more distribution of current property tax because they don't go delinquent until September, so the county will continue to collect some current property tax, and then we'll start seeing our delinquent property tax kind of come back to life, whereas now we're not collecting as much because there's not as much as delinquent, but we will see that. In looking at all of the property tax numbers, the motor vehicle revenue numbers, through that May distribution that we just got, they looked pretty comparative to prior years at this point. Obviously, going forward, we don't know what that's going to do, but especially with motor vehicle or some of those that are kind of paid monthly, we might have some issues with those. Property tax won't be collected again until December, other than those people that are paying late at this point.
And Mike Scragg again. You may recall that staff put in quite a bit of effort to do historical analysis to see what, on a monthly basis, what our performance was like, and trying to smooth some of that out and correct some of that data. And the whole premise was pick any line item. If we're 4 months in, that's a third of the year. Historically, have we been at 33%? Have we been at 38%? Have we been at 27%? That's the basis for us then to project forward to the end of the year. That all presumes that our future is going to represent our past, and of all times, that's just not a very reliable assumption at the moment.
Yeah.
So I say that just because I think these projections need a healthy caveat on them in light of that uncertain future ahead of us.
Mayor Hoppick here. On property taxes, do we get any of the interest and penalties that are collected on those? No. I didn't think so. Okay. It's 11% interest rate. I was like, well, it's a little high, so, okay.
Then the following slides go through the motor vehicle comparison to COVID, the franchise fees. I will note on the franchise fee, it looks really good because we did do that transfer for the wastewater, but it comes back to itself in about November, December, when that would have normally been done. EMS revenues are tracking pretty close to where that we budgeted. Municipal court, we have several different scenarios on that because we weren't sure when they were shut down what that was going to do. I will say that those numbers looked better than we anticipated them to look in April, but we don't know how that's going to move forward. We did have a conversation with municipal court this morning, and they felt like the stimulus was helping because people are trying to get that off their back. So they're trying to come in and pay some of those cases and, those types of things. So hopefully that's a good sign. But
is municipal court operating again, Commissioner Franz? What's the status on that?
They were furloughed, but they've begun operations last week. Yes.
Okay.
And they have been, that was another conversation, they have been having some court hearings this week.
Yeah, I'm asking if they're processing cases again, and there's got to be a backlog at this point.
Yeah, definitely. They saw it coming, and they were able to schedule cases out to May 18th, which lined up very nicely with the first round of the reopening plan. But yes, they have a backlog they're trying to dig out of.
And then this is the sales and use tax one. Of course, we have the 3 scenarios on that compared to our budget, our original budget. That shows us anywhere from, I think, 13 to 15% low or something like that. And then this graph, 13, is the one that I mentioned about the 531 sales tax. This is just the current month of May compared to last year. And you can see for May it's down 10% from last year, but year to date we're still up 1.1% for sales tax. This is only sales tax for the city sales tax. Now, as we look at sales and use tax, because we know use tax is kind of still going up a little bit, that kind of helps us out a little bit in some of these numbers.
Commissioner Franz here, I would note that we're up 1%, but through April, we went from being up 5% to being up only 1%.
Correct.
So that's, we're still coasting off of last Christmas to some extent.
Yes.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And the only information that's even starting to attach to the pandemic is the May numbers being associated with March. And the first half of March till the 16th was normal. And from the 16th on was the mass gathering limitations.
And,
That was
and
it.
that's a pretty significant change, you know, for a half a month.
Yeah.
So then what we wanted to provide here is kind of where those numbers did come in for sales tax. So this is on the 30, 60, and 90-day scenarios. In this graph, the yellow columns are what we projected, and then the gray columns for those two particular months, April and May, are what actually came in. So for example, for general merchandise, which is the third line item down, we projected 100% of collections, and we came in at 118% collection in April. We projected 135 in May and came in at 134% in May. So this provides you kind of where we were in the projection, and obviously in April we were still thinking we were at 100%. Some of those came in, some of those didn't, and as I mentioned earlier, the ones that were pretty obvious were the travel and accommodations, the restaurants, and those things that came in a little bit lower. Some of them came in really close and some of them didn't. So we are constantly looking at that. The number that is kind of interesting is on the bottom where we show the totals. Our projected collection was $1,010,000. In April, we collected $1,008,000, which was a $2,000 difference to the negative. In April, our projection was only $938,000 because we had gone into this and said, we know this is going to go down. We collected $1,061,000, which is $123,000 more than what we projected at that time. So we'll continue to look at these and watch these, and we've had the discussion of going back to, after we get a couple of these months in, and we can see how people are reacting after they get out of the stay-at-home and see where those numbers are going, to look at what we've projected through the end of the year and see if any of those numbers need to be revised.
Mike Scragg again. We're throwing around a lot of numbers, and for the listeners at home, Debbie makes really good points, and you may recall, we could see a little bit what was happening in terms of the toilet paper shortage and the store shelves being empty, and we had the benefit of Moody's and some of their projections. We tried to incorporate that. So we could see the 135% coming in terms of general merchandise, and it turned out to be 134. There's other categories here which we haven't touched on that, in reverse, we thought we'd see 75% in terms of sporting goods and saw 50. And then the other point that I would make is just that when we say we were $123,000 to the good, I'm not saying this to be smart, but we're $123,000 less poor than we expected.
Less bad.
It was less bad than we expected. It's not a windfall.
And Mayor Hoppick here, there's so many variables that we're just going to have to, we can't panic yet, and we can't raise our hand and go hoo either, because we don't know. Again, when we look at the April sales tax, which we'll get in June, we had the stimulus checks that hit, we had the unemployment with the additional $600, and it appears that some of that has helped. Where I start getting concerned is August, when the $600 unemployment goes away and if people aren't back to work. So we can't get too excited because we're ahead of our projections, because we don't really know what the last half of the year is going to bring either. So I think we just have to monitor it month to month, and we'll see. So
I would say the Federal Reserve Chairman shares the exact same concern, that he stressed that at the point that stimulus ends in the end of July, that recovery point is going to be possibly a point of inflection.
And we've had the PPP that's kept businesses, kept people on payroll for 8 weeks. So there's some things that kind of go away that maybe have artificially kept some retail sales up. We'll see what happens when we get to the fourth quarter. So, okay, any questions or comments for staff on this? Appreciate the detail and keeping us up to date, obviously. So
I would just remark, Commissioner Ryan here, the exercise of studying all of these things in so much depth because of this issue. I think the silver lining in that is that we're all better versed at where the money is coming from and going.
Where it's coming from, where it's going. All right. So
You may recall I indicated a desire to do more financial analysis and be more graphical, but
This is not what you had in mind, right?
this was not exactly what I had in mind.
I guess we should. Are there anybody on the phone that would like to comment on this, I guess, before we...
Bear with me. I have to get it out of
See if anybody
screensaver
stayed
mode.
with us this long. Did you lose a mic?
Oh, I'm trying to enter the password with caps lock on. Sorry about that. We just have a handful of callers, but if anybody wishes to address the commission, please press star 9. Okay, of the callers that are here, I don't see anyone indicating they wish to address you.
Okay. Okay, with that, we're ready to move into other business, which I know we have some executive sessions. I'm guessing, haven't heard from Mayor Davis, but you probably want a 5-minute break, don't you?
Please.
Commissioner Davis, I am going to step out of the meeting after this session, just because of some obligations I need to attend to where I am out of town here.
Okay.
Mayor Hoppick, I had a couple items under other business.
Okay.
Would you prefer to address those before we get into the executive session business?
We can do those under other business. So, okay, before we go into executive session, we'll go to other business then.
Thank you very much. I just had a couple of questions regarding our reduced service level and staffing of departments. And I was just curious because I've gotten some calls from people that have been concerned that they couldn't reach their department, say on Friday or whatever. And I didn't know, do we have answering machine messages that say that this particular department is closed and unable to respond to your request at this time?
We're supposed to. There was a standard script developed and distributed organization-wide, but if you're aware of a location that's not the case, please let me know and we'll track it down.
Okay, good deal. I just wanted to make sure that, at any rate, I just wanted to make sure that was out there. And then the other thing that in relationship to that, a couple of weeks ago, I'd asked about an update on whether or not all of our employees that we've enrolled in the shared work program have gotten up to speed on their benefits. And I didn't know if you had a status report on that, whether everybody has been able to access those benefits and has more or less been made as whole as we can make them.
I can't speak to everyone, but we have been monitoring the fact that the communication has gone out. Our employees have received initial communication from the Department of Labor about their unemployment benefits and the estimate of their benefits. And as far as I know, we're seeing confirmation that employees are receiving unemployment as well as, whether it's work share or a furlough, as well as the $600 a week payment. Now, it may be in arrears in terms of the Kansas Department of Labor, but our understanding is that our employees are seeing that now.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then kind of a related issue to that is I've been contacted by some employees within the organization that have concerns about their being on a reduced work schedule, but still having expectations of producing labor for a full 40-hour week or 40 plus. And I think that these are primarily, they've communicated to me anonymously, so I don't know where it's coming from. And I shared this concern with Mayor Hoppick, and he made the point, anonymous communications, take them for what they're worth. But I think it does, it just raised some questions for me in terms of, the importance of our understanding that our employees are not going to be as productive because they're on reduced scheduling. And what I don't want to happen is for us to do anything that's going to put our participation in the shared work program in any kind of jeopardy. So I just wanted to, to run that past you, confirm it. Sure. And because people reached out directly to me, I printed these off a couple of weeks ago, so they should be sanitized because they've been sitting out for a couple of weeks. And if you want copies of the correspondence, I'll leave them here. But sure. I felt that the concerns were significant enough that it rose to the level of bringing them to the governing body's attention.
If I can, you mentioned that, well, I guess we didn't meet on Memorial Day, so the week prior. Yeah. And I took that to be concerns about salaried employees on work-share in particular. And I think I shared then that we were hopeful that by closing the office one day a week, that would equate to a 20% reduction. And we'd heard that other employers pre-pandemic, pre-COVID-19 that had used work-share had kind of taken the approach of, you can kind of continue to perform like a salaried employee 4 days out of 5. But I had a conversation with the executive staff 2 weeks ago now, indicating there is no expectation you're going to continue to do the same amount of work with the office closed one day a week, and made it very clear that we need to communicate to our salaried employees, I expect less, was my direct quote. And so the HR director summarized all that and sent it not only to the department heads, but the salaried employees that are on work-share. But we also followed up with the Department of Labor in terms of whether that approach was acceptable. And the HR director had a conversation with a representative of the Department of Labor in middle to end of last week. There's a delay in terms of contacting them and hearing back. They clarified, salaried or not, it is strict adherence to hours. And so we communicated that to executive staff today, and the HR director and I, she's inventoried the number of salaried employees that we have on work-share, and there's 46 of them. So our intention is to review initially with the department head each one of those salaried employees and whether it's realistic to think that we can continue to manage their work schedule to 32 hours. I think there's some that has been working and can continue to work. There's others that attend evening meetings and morning meetings and take phone calls at off hours. And so I think we'll end up in 3 possible scenarios. One, it's working, and we're going to continue to try to make it work. The HR director was able to confirm that we don't need a lot of additional process with the Department of Labor to take an employee off and on of work-share, so we can report out week by week whether they were successful. So we also communicated that if it's apparent that you're not going to meet your work-share hours, then we need to work them a full 40 so they get a full paycheck from us. We don't leave them stranded between, say it was 32 and they work 35 and now the state doesn't pay them unemployment and they're short 5 hours. If it's apparent that they're not going to meet their work share numbers, then they need to work a full schedule for that week. And then the Department of Labor has indicated, report that. They won't receive unemployment benefits that week, but if they get back on schedule the next week, they can. So I think that's scenario number 2. And then I do think that in light of some of the employees, the guidance we got from the Department of Labor and what we know about some of the employees' inability to truly keep it down to, in this scenario, 32 hours in a 4-day period, we're going to have to take them off of work-share. I don't know that number yet. We need to conduct that review. I personally, as part of my time card, said, take me off of work-share and go ahead and start my salary reduction. I'm just not able to, between morning meetings, evening meetings, phone calls, I made a best effort, but it was admittedly very stressful trying to manage that, and it just wasn't possible.
And thank you for sharing that with us. But because we're all dealing with programs that we've never dealt with before, we're in a situation we've never been in, and I just, my intention is to just make sure that we're communicating as clearly as we can with the department heads and the supervisors, because it's very difficult to get out a consistent message, and making sure that everybody is communicating that to the people that they supervise. So-
You're absolutely right. That's definitely the case. That's why, in addition to having the conversation with the exec staff, we emailed directly with the salaried employees that are on work share. And, we said at the outset, whether it's work share or whether it's a lot of these other budget decisions, we're going to have to continue to monitor and adapt. And in all honesty, going into the, that budget challenge of closing that $2 million gap, I didn't think we'd do it like we've been able to so far. I thought the impacts on our employees were going to be much more significant, but my intention never was to put an employee in a compromising position where they felt like they needed to report something other than, we're trying to figure out this program, we're trying to communicate it to our employees and trying to be forthright with them that, if it doesn't work, you need to talk with your supervisor. And given the state's pay period, it starts on a Sunday. If you see something on Sunday, if something happens on Sunday and you can adjust your schedule later in the week to manage to the number, that would help. I did make the point with the executive staff that while you may feel compelled to answer email, you may feel compelled to respond to voicemail, the higher priority at the moment is trying to help us solve this budget gap. And if that, it's hard to internalize that you may not get to things like you normally do, but you're helping our organization if you can manage to that lesser number, but it's not always going to be possible.
Great. Well, thank you for that reassurance. I appreciate it.
Anything else? Okay. Any other business? Okay. We need to go into executive session. Any idea how long we need to do on the first one?
If you want to take a 7-minute break and a 25-minute executive session, that'd round off to 6:30.
I'll talk really fast because I can't do the math on the clock.
Okay.
That's why we need digital for me. Okay, I move the City Commission recess into executive session for 25 minutes. Is that what you said? 25 minutes?
Yeah.
To discuss with environmental counsel for the Salina public entities and the city's legal counsel the subject of confidential mediation with representatives of the U.S. Department of Justice.
I'm sorry.
Oh, am I on the wrong one?
You're on the wrong one.
Oh,
Yeah.
I already turned the page.
Yeah.
Now you're going to have to adjust our time again. That'll be 26 minutes.
I've got feedback that may be too long, but we always seem to fill it. So.
Okay. I move that the City Commission recess into executive session for 25 minutes to discuss the subject of a specific economic development prospect based upon the need to discuss data relating to financial affairs or trade secrets of corporations, partnerships, trusts, and individual proprietorships pursuant to KSA 75-4319B4. The open meeting will resume in this room at 6:30 p.m. and will include a 7-minute break.
Can I get
Second.
Thank you. Thought I lost a couple of them down there. We got a motion and a second to move into executive session for 25 minutes, return back here to the open meeting at 6:30. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
If I could cover just a couple of housekeeping items. Commissioner Davis, were you're intending to drop off the call at this point, or do you want to participate in the first executive session? I wasn't clear.
I think we may have already lost
he
him.
already
Maybe you just answered that question. And for the listeners, for those that are dialed into the call, we'll put the call on mute and they can remain on the call, and we'll pick it back up when we return. And Salina Media Connection will do their normal process of posting notice, and we'll do the same for YouTube Live.
Okay, we are back in session. We are ready to move into our next executive session.
All right. If I can get up and read the right one this time.
Okay.
I move that the City Commission recess into executive session for 90 minutes to discuss with legal counsel the following subjects. 1, with environmental counsel for the Salina public entities and the city's legal counsel, the subject of confidential mediation with representatives of the U.S. Department of Justice and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers associated with pending litigation in U.S. District Court relating to the former Schilling Air Force Base environmental matter, and with legal counsel. Number 2, the subject of legal considerations relating to specific points of negotiation raised by Saline County upon review of the draft Expo Center lease. 3, the subject of the legal considerations presented by the request of the Saline County Fair Association, Incorporated, for the continued use of Tri-River Stadium in conducting future Tri-Rivers fairs. And 4, the subject of a notice of claim filed by legal counsel for Melissa Fullen, Matthew Fullen, and Beverly Fullen, based upon the need for consultation with an attorney for the public body which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship pursuant to KSA 75-4319B2. The open meeting will resume in this room at 8:04 p.m.
8:04, okay.
Second?
Okay, Mayor Hoppick here. We have a motion, a second to move into executive session for 90 minutes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
I doubt anybody's still on the line, but just in case.
For sign this, is that what we want?
Okay, we're back in session, and there's no action to be, oh, we're unmuted. Okay, we're back in session, and there's no action to be taken. So with that, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
Mayor Hoppick here. We have a motion, and a second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We will see everyone next Monday. Thank you.
I said nay. I don't even know what I'm thinking.
Commissioner Hodges, I was going to ask you a question.